several kunai with seals on them from his weapons pouch. I'll be fishing nearby for the next several weeks. When you're done, just send up a flare, and I'll come for you. I assume you have something already devised just in case. The man smiled with a knowing look, receiving a nod from the blonde. Well, then I'll be off. Naruto smiled before hurling a single kunai high into the air before disappearing. The fisherman looked high into the sky, seeing the blonde reappear before noting another throwing motion and another vanishing act. High in the sky, Naruto was laughing boisterously at the height he already reached, able to see the entire island from his current altitude. Just as the blonde felt the pull of gravity, another kunai escaped his grasp and he vanished once more. This time, he found himself directly above the shore before throwing one straight down only to vanish and reappear with his feet sinking in the loose sand. I've been looking forward to this for some time, he smiled, looking around at the lush greenery. He nipped his thumb before rubbing a trail of blood over his hand, making several hand seals quickly followed by a shout of Kuchios no Jutsu. And after slamming his hand to the ground, 3 lesser wolf summons appeared. The wolves of varying colors sat patiently on their hind legs awaiting their orders, earning a smile from the blonde. You two scout the western and eastern sides of the forest. Hanto, you're with me. Hi, Naruto-sama. The blonde heard before the brown and tan wolves went off on their way, the silver and black wolf, Hanto, beginning to walk towards the center of the island. Naruto followed casually, allowing his summoned wolf to sniff out any stray scent he could as they went. There seems to be a scent of fire in the air, and a fairly fresh one of a ninjin female, Hanto noted, earning a confused look from the blonde. How do you suppose someone would have gotten on the island, let alone survived here? There are plenty of scents that match up to varying animals, and with all of the vegetation, I assume that's how they survived. As for getting here, there was a shipwreck on shore. The wolf shrugged, and Naruto nodded in understanding. Do you think you can lead me to this person? Given enough time, absolutely, but her scent is too well spread to pinpoint to one location. I think she's been here for some time, Hanto answered as they came to what looked like the walls of the ruined village, or what once was the walls. Continue to scout the area, and let the other two know about our guest. I'll look around the village proper. The blonde ordered before the wolf did as told, and went on his way. Naruto took that time to look over the long-destroyed village, noting that the Hokage had been right about the number of buildings still standing, for exactly. Activating his Sharingan, he could spot the tremor of chakra in the air before the building, signifying a nigh-hidden and powerful wall shielded him from them. Well, I suppose now I'll need to start looking for a way through it, he sighed, before stuffing his hands in his pockets and walking towards them. Not having his senses stretched and searching allowed him to miss the owner of a pair of curious black eyes watching him quite closely as he moved. Achin, trapped on this island for longer than I care to remember, only for a rather interesting man to appear. The voice, while hushed, was feminine in nature with a seeming playful edge to it. I wonder who exactly you are, my dear Okami-kun. Naruto at the time had just lifted up his hand and placed it on the barrier, noting that at contact a small surge of his own chakra touching it caused it to become visible to the naked eye. Interesting, he muttered, before pulling his hand back, commanding a Rasengan into existence and slamming the attack to the barrier. His reward was for the barrier to immediately shoot him sailing back, like a sheet in the wind. Damn, I've got to learn this barrier technique if I can. If it can block the damn Rasengan, it could stand up to a Bijidama possibly. Doubtful ninjin. A deep voice spoke to him from within, bringing a small bit of surprise to him. It's been a while since you've spoken to me, Sanbai-san. Doing well? Just fine, Gaki. Wondering what exactly I'm doing back on this forsaken island. The Sanbai seemed annoyed by the fact, making the blonde raise a brow in confusion. When were you ever on this island? He questioned, and he could immediately feel the connection between them sour in an odd way. I and another of my kind were originally held by humans of this land. We were unleashed and resealed in the siege of this land by its attackers, which ended with me in Kirigakure and my brother wherever he now is. The turtle revealed. It seemed the blonde would be in for a multitude of surprise on this trip. If you two were released and participated in the destruction, Wouldn't this barrier have been standing when one of you unleashed a Bijadama? You could always give me control and find out for yourself, the beast lazily goaded, earning a scoff from the blonde as he walked back up to the barrier. While we need to work on our relationship, I believe you understand I'm not entirely fond of anyone else being in control of my actions. Besides, it just forces a challenge to my Fuinjutsu ability, Naruto answered, and smiled as the turtle's enthusiasm to speak seemed to disappear. You know, we will be stuck together for some time, and it would seem you weren't too opposed to the former clan member of mine who you were with. Maybe we could use this time from the village to work on our few remaining differences. Uzumaki's, always the first to go against the norm of Yunin Jin, just by his tone, Naruto could tell the bijou was shaking its head, and it made him smile. The Uzumaki I was formerly sealed within, she was a very kind and caring woman, even to someone like me who promised her death. She was the first human I ever truly worked with in any kind of way and the only to hear my name. Naruto stopped in his search for any clues at the mention of a name. It sounds stupid asking after you've already said so, but you have a name, he asked before returning to his search. I do. The man who brought the 9 bijou into existence gave each of us our very own name. He is the only other redeeming member of your society I have ever met, the beast informed. I presume that would be the Rakuto Sennin of legends? His answer was beaten to him by a surge of surprise through their mental connection. Not many ninjin believe anything about things considered legend, at least the ones I've come in contact with. I'm sure you're already aware I'm not most people, your first example having been I'm probably the only Jinchuriki who ever willingly chose that path. I believe every legend hides its own amount of truth within it, he explained, smiling as he found the first sign of a ceiling formation. The turtle seemed to agree with him on his point as a laugh escaped the chakra construct. Fair enough, maybe you aren't so bad, Ibwa, the turtle said with a small chuckle. Yeah, talk to you next time, Sanbai-san. The blonde shook his head, beginning to examine the ceiling array he discovered. Isabu. The blonde was surprised by the correction, but smiled and allowed the conversation to die there. Turning his eyes back to the seal, activating his Sharingan to get a better look at the construction of it. His eyes trailed up the seal, finding a line of chakra connecting it to another location that he made haste to find. When he came to the end of the trail, he was met with the sight of a much larger seal that seemed to have several more streams of chakra connecting to it in a loop. This is probably the most layered seal I've ever seen. It must have taken years to even prepare. There's a chakra recycling function even involved. He shook his head, meaning this barrier could stand for far longer than any human of this generation would live. Well, maybe not much longer, he muttered, noticing the hidden machinations of a blood seal within it. He pulled out a kunai and sliced his hand open before placing it on the seal, watching in fascination as the complex seals all moved and rotated into the Uzumaki symbol proper. I suppose it's a good thing I have a mother of the main house. That could have hurt otherwise, he chuckled morbidly before smiling as he looked over the buildings. A moment later, he made a crossed hand seal before 100 or more perfect clones of himself appeared and immediately moved towards the 4 buildings, intent on discovering its secrets. His hidden observer had watched everything with interest, though it was rather odd to see him have a conversation with himself. But she had breathed a sigh of relief when he mentioned being a willing Jinchuriki. At the very least, this new man on the island wasn't insane. Watching a Sharingan spin to life in his black eye had shocked her more than the Jinchuriki part, in all honesty. And then he had gone on to unlock the Uzumaki blood seal with his own blood. So, my dear Okunkun is an Uzumaki. That explains why he's here to an extent, I suppose. I wonder if he's got any strength to him, she mused, then watched as he created more than 100 solid copies of himself, her thoughts becoming surprisingly lewd. No, stop. God, I've been alone on this island too long to actually be thinking something like that. She shook her head full of long, wild black hair. But her eyes widened as she noted the original standing there, looking directly at her with a smirk on his face. I've known you were there since before I dropped the barrier, he informed her with a smirk, watching as the person stepped out with hands held up in surrender. He watched the way the wind played with her messy, curly black hair that fell past her waist, noting that she seemed to have a shinobi's build, even being stranded as she was. What village do you come from? I'm not from a village. I've been traveling with my clan for as long as I can remember, she answered calmly, and he took the moment to look over her disheveled and slightly stained clothing. What clan do you come from? My name is Uchiha Katsumi, she said, earning a questioning look from him before he activated that Sharingan of his once more. This time, however, her breathing nearly hitched when it evolved into an eternal Mangekyo form. There are no Uchiha outside of Konohagakure. Who are you? She could feel his chakra flaring to life, as if almost to warn her that lying wasn't an option, but the smile never dropped from her face. I am an Uchiha. She emphasized her point by activating her own Sharingan. Not every member of my clan agreed with the alliance to the Senju. As a result, I was born a continent over to a nomad branch of the clan. There's no mention of something like this having happened, but your Sharingan is enough proof, I suppose. Naruto relented, allowing his Mangekyo to fade, but that pulsing chakra of his remained. This Katsumi's Sharingan also faded before she allowed her arms to rest at her side, looking over the tall sun-kissed blonde. I suppose then the shipwreck on the shore belongs to you? I'm sure it wasn't recorded that there was a split in my illustrious clan, and yes, you'd be correct, Okami-kun, she said with a small smile. Who are you, and what brings you to this island? Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto, shinobi of Konohagakure. I'm here to recover anything left by my mother's clan. He admitted in honesty, watching as his three summons came up around him, one standing just behind her. Find anything, you three? Nothing, Naruto-sama. You found something though it would seem, Hanto said, being the wolf directly behind her, as if preparing for the girl to make a run for it. Then you three can take off. Even if she does run, she won't have far to go. He chuckled before the three wolves bowed and disappeared as commanded. I suppose you'll be wanting to leave the island with me given the chance. Just chomping at the bit to save a beautiful damsel in distress. Any, Okami-kun? She questioned in a blatantly teasing manner, eyeing him a little bit more than just sizing him up. Haven't even taken me to dinner, and you're already trying to whisk me off my feet. Such a charmer. The blonde scoffed before rolling his eyes in exasperation. Were all women like this? I get the idea that you're not just some damsel, and that's not because of your clan name, he countered, watching as she walked closer to him. We could always have a mock battle. I'm sure your Bunshin can take care of everything else, she offered, stopping halfway. Though, I'm sure you wouldn't want to destroy what's left of the village. Her taunt seemed to have the desired effect, as the blonde reactivated the barrier before looking at the girl with a wolfish smirk. I think the buildings will be just fine, Hirohime, she smiled, feeling his chakra spike once more. I'm honestly a little giddy, Okami-kun. Sakura sighed as she watched her crimson-haired teammate wrestle the cat belonging to the daimyo's wife for the second time this week. It was more than a letdown to be doing missions like this again after their mission to Nami no Kuni. We'll probably be seeing this scene again before Daimyo-sama leaves. I blame Naruto-sensei, Sasuke said from her left, making her shrug. Maybe next time it will be you actually catching the cat instead of Minma. His eyes narrowed at the taunt, finding it rather odd considering how she would have usually fawned over him. But it was honestly nice for a girl not to be doing that, especially not one his team assignment forced him to be around daily. Don't the Uchiha have an affinity for cats anyway? Lions specifically, my mother holds the contract now, but I'll probably take the Raven contract like my Enai-sama, Sasuke answered, watching as Minma hog-tied the struggling cat. Maybe one of you would like to carry the devil's spawn now that I've wrapped him up so neatly, Minma said with an annoyed look, earning an eye roll from Sasuke and a smile from the pinkette. I guess I can hold him this time, Minma-kun, she relented, taking the lead from him even as the cat continued to struggle. Well, it looks like you three have gotten a good mastery of catching deer, Tora-kun. Kakashi smiled as he dropped down from a tree above. The response given was 3 equally burning glares. It would seem his cute little Janine were having some moral issues. C rank, no more D rank, Minma voiced for the group, his violet eyes glaring threateningly. Kakashi smiled like any other time the crimson-haired boy made a demand, patting his head condescendingly. I'll see what I can do, he said with a chuckle. While Sakura and Sasuke seemed relieved by that, Minma openly groaned, they probably weren't getting a C rank. Naruto panted, giving the woman before him a predatory glance, a very similar look in her own eyes before her form exploded in a burst of speed headed straight for him. His forearm quickly buffered her spinning kick before he dove in with 2 hooks to each side of her ribs, clearly rocking her. He wasn't holding a thing back. He finished the combo with a sickening uppercut before spinning in place and delivering a kick to her midsection that sent her sprawling back. Maybe close range isn't the best place for you to be fighting me, he chuckled, hopping lightly from one foot to the other as he shook his arms out before going back into his guard. Standing up in her original position before her attack, she spat out a small amount of blood before giving him a bloody grin. It would have unsettled any other man, but it only seemed to excite the blonde more as he cracked his neck and made a come hither motion with his hands. It was in this moment she took the first semblance to the Gaigeki ki Kin the Uchiha were so well known for, but just from her stance alone, he could tell something was different about it. Her Sharingan flared, before evolving into the Mangekyo, that wolfish smirk lighting his face as his own Mangekyo came to life. But his eyes widened when not even his eyes could pick up the punch that grazed his jaw. He'd only moved thanks to years of hard, trained reflexes, and even then it didn't prepare him for the flying knee that hit him square on the jaw. But Katsumi wasn't done there as she used his thigh as a springboard to jump and spin herself around, going for the spinning kick once more. This time it landed right on the mark, sending the blonde sailing to the right. When he rolled from the ground and to his feet, the confident smirk on her face brought that wolfish smirk back to life as he wiped the blood from his lip. They were matched in what ninjutsu they had shown the other, each having 3 elements of their own. Neither could catch the other with Jinjutsu, least of all the ones spawned from their eyes. Naruto's Mangekyo was more geared towards the hypnotism aspect of the eye, meaning he had a shorter repertoire of Jinjutsu the eye gifted him, literally meaning he could only use Jinjutsu spawned from his eye, nothing else. While Katsumi seemed to have more of a grasp to the predictive nature of the eye, having perfectly copied his Suiton and Doton Jutsu from his arsenal. Well, not perfectly power-wise. Naruto was proving to be a chakra beast in his own right, as his original jutsus had completely overpowered her copies. Taijutsu, however, it originally seemed he had the upper hand, and while he still thought he did, she had an ace up her sleeve for pinches. Using the Shunshin that way brings back some memories of my best friend. His abilities with the Sharingan had given him similar control over it. He chuckled, before smirking slightly. But I've got something for that. She never got to finish as the blonde suddenly appeared with his fist jammed into her gut, sending her up into the air. Before she could even feel the effects of gravity, however, he appeared before her again, faster than her eye could predict. Katsumi swore she felt her jaw pop when his foot connected with it, truly sending her sailing into the air. Her flight was stopped quickly, though, as she assumed the blonde appeared behind her before a kick sent her sorrowing into the ground. Or, so she thought, as she felt someone catch her with a chuckle. Maybe that's just a little much for a sparring match, she heard his voice before opening her eyes to find the most charming smile on his face. Katsumi felt the warmth radiating from him as he held her to his chest in a bridal carry. The Uchiha woman found herself wanting to protest as he gingerly sat her on her feet, stabilizing her as her knees buckled, and she didn't think it was the sore body that made her knees do that. No, after being on an island alone for years, it was realizing just how handsome this very tall man was as she looked up to him. "I believe you may be right," she muttered, black eyes trained on his entrancingly exotic mismatched pair. She quickly realized how close they were and pushed herself off him, her face dusting pink before casting him a rather uncharacteristically shy look. "It was nice to spar with you. I haven't been so outclassed except by my Inazuma," she smiled, making the blonde chuckle. "Looks like my clones have sealed quite a bit of what little was here already," he said before gaining a headache as 3 were forcefully dispelled at once. 3 seemed to have found a seal they shouldn't have messed with, he groaned, rubbing his temples. "You receive the memories of your clones when they dispel?" Naruto looked down at her, noting the cute, confused tilt to her head. "Maybe we should tell each other about ourselves and some of our abilities instead of punching each other so much," he stated with a laugh. Katsumi giggled. "That may clear some things up," she agreed. rather thankful the person who finally stumbled upon her was proving to be a decent human. Minma smirked as he held the starting stance of his father's Hakadori kin, his violet eyes focused on the jade green of his sparring partner. Sakura stood in the stance Tsunade had been teaching her since she had become the female Sannin student, said blonde woman watching from the porch with a saucer of sake in hand. Okay, Gakis, it's not a starring contest, get to it, she chided before taking a healthy sip of her drink. When she brought the saucer down, she smiled, seeing Minma bob under a hook from his teammate, quickly coming up with a strike to her left side, and then another that was blocked on her other. It seemed Sakura was getting used to the pattern of the basic stance of the Hakadori kin. That in itself was enough to impress the blonde Senju. Minato had outdone himself in creating this taijutsu style from scratch, not even to mention having made 3 levels to it. Hidden moves the eldest of the brothers knew included. Shinaro, her student, growled, unleashing a wild downward punch that Minma initially just stepped back from. But when her fist connected with the ground and the earth itself was cracked and broken, he quickly made distance with a flip. The Pinkette was quick to press him, though, jumping through the earth she had kicked up. However, her eyes widened when she saw that telltale smirk that you had just played into the prankster's hand. It was too late for her to dodge or parry as she felt his knee connect with her midsection, before he dropped low and shot back up with a flurry of punches. This time she wasn't fortunate enough to counter or block any, not before the damage had been done at least. However, as the crimson-haired boy went for a kick to end his combo, her arm caught it and pulled it tight into her guard. This time she smiled at the audible gulp he released when he felt her iron grip she had on him. But just as Sakura went for a second punch after the first had connected, Minma decided to use gravity to his advantage and fall back. The result was bringing her down into a guillotine chokehold. Her only answer was to begin punching his ribs. Tap, Sakura-chan, he grunted, as she felt her vision beginning to darken from the lack of oxygen. She only tried a moment more before finally tapping her hand against his bicep until he released her. Sakura choked out gasps as her lungs fought for that precious oxygen. You've gotten a lot better, Sakura-chan, Minma laughed, causing the pink-haired girl to look down at him. They were still on the ground, with her on top of the smiling idiot, and she just realized how close they really were as she felt his breath hit her cheek. Green eyes met violet as her breathing hitched, finding herself sinking into those dark yet bright hues, heat racing across her cheeks. Sakura-chan, are you getting sick? You're flush, he worriedly noted, pressing a gentle hand to her forehead to check for heat. It was this action that caused that light dusting of pink to burn crimson as the boy's hair, before she shrieked and knocked the boy square on the jaw, the knockout button as Tsunade had once described it. True to her Shursho's words, the crimson-haired Uzumaki was out like a light as she panted to regain her composure, not realizing she still sat on his lap. One day you're just gonna have to admit you have a thing for my grandson, Tsunade snorted, chugging another saucer as she ignored any protests sent her way. Regardless, good work, you've been improving a lot lately. Why don't you take the guest room, and we can get an early morning practice in before you have your team meeting. Sakura immediately shot off of Minma's lap, bowing to her master. Yes, Shursho, thank you for the accommodations and praise. Tsunade waved her off. Just make sure you get my youngest idiot to his own room. It won't do him any good to sleep out here in the cold, Sakura blushed, but agreed to do as asked as she dragged the boy to her shoulder by his arm. Tsunade watching her student carry her grandson in before looking up to the stars with a smile on her face. Those 2 brats of yours are going to give me some beautiful great-grandkids. Kushi-chan, Minato-kun, she whispered fondly. In the past, before knowing the truth, she had often looked at Kushina and Minato as her own children. It pained her to know she had been so close to her biological son and she didn't even know it. But, in a way, if it wasn't for those 2, she would have left the village a long time ago. Drinking alone, Suam, you know what that does to you. She smiled at the deep voice of Jiraiya, the man seemingly having appeared from thin air. You're not going to let a lady drink alone, are you, Jiraiya-kun? She gave him a look that nearly made him pop from excitement then and there. He flawlessly scooted himself right into her side, his large arm wrapping around her back as he grabbed the full spare saucer. I knew you wouldn't let me down, Baka, she smiled. laying her head on his shoulder as she sipped her saucer at a much more sedate pace. Never, Suheim. He smiled lovingly, glad to be living one of his biggest dreams here and now. Chapter 6, Yuzushiogakure. Sakura smiled as she laid the contently snoozing, even if it was because of her knocking him out, crimson-haired form of Minma on his bed. When walking the boy into his room, she honestly found herself surprised by how neatly kept it was. Not a single sign of mess in the room, with a bookcase full of scrolls, desk that she assumed he studied at, a simple queen-sized bed, and 2 large windows with a garden box in each. She had never pegged her rambunctious teammate to have the patience for botany, let alone the fuinjutsu she could now see littering the small desk upon further inspection. She turned those green eyes of hers back to him as she watched his face scrunch in discomfort as he seemed to struggle to remove his orange shirt in his slumber. Giggling softly, she placed a knee on the bed and leaned over to him, assisting him in taking the garment off. A smile came to her face as she saw that visage of content return to his face, until her eyes trailed down his frame. Sakura could feel the heat radiating off her own cheeks as she examined the impressively built torso of the boy, achieving what many his age only dreamed of. She didn't even realize her own hand tracing the minute definition of his abdomen until her hand ran over a scar that ran diagonally over one of the mounds of muscle. Her breathing hitched as she pulled her hand away as if bitten, leaving her eyes to trace quite possibly the only blemish on his skin. It didn't look like a professional cut, and by its jagged nature, she idly found herself wondering if it had gone clean through him. That led into worry of how exactly the boy had received a scar like that so early into their careers as shinobi. But, judging by the way she had seen him train, part of her just wanted to chalk it up to that. However, she sat down gently on the edge of his bed, a regretful look coming to her eyes. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you in the past, Minma-kun. It wasn't fair to you, especially with how much you've supported my training recently," she whispered, her hand moving of its own volition and traced the skin of his own. "Certainly with the myriad of emotions I've been developing for you, even if I don't understand how." She smiled bitterly as her hand moved and pushed the bangs from his forehead. "I do hope I build the courage to say this to you when you're awake sometime," she admitted before laying a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Baka," she snorted as she saw that foxy grin mar his face after she pulled away. Getting up to leave, she looked back as she was about to pull the door shut behind her, throwing one last fond smile to him before closing it. Naruto awoke with a start, rubbing the bleariness from his eyes as he looked over to see the embers of a dying fire still lit from the camp they had built outside of the buildings. Katsumi was still snoozing away in her sleeping bag, having experienced sake at his behest for the first time the previous night. It had been fairly easy to form a semblance of camaraderie with the strange woman. Most of the night after breaking the seal his clones had found, storing the forbidden scroll of the Uzumaki clan, the two had just simply shared stories of their pasts, families, and where they came from. Katsumi had told him of the continent across the eastern sea that one would have to sail beyond Mizu no Kuni to reach, and her small clan had inhabited. Told him of the brother who had envisioned something more than the clan for her, and of his kind ways. Of the father who honestly reminded him of Fugaku if he had to compare them. Described how several years ago her brother had finally gone against the father, killing him and slaughtering the rest of the clan who rose against him. It ended in the two siblings on a boat to return to the land their family had been founded upon, until a whirlpool opening beneath their boat took her brother from her. He had forced her to take his eyes and promise him to survive on this new island until help came, to uphold their dream to overcome the hate of their father and clan. Naruto had told her of his past just as it had happened, of people he'd lost like Izumi and Shursui, how they had given their eyes to him. Told her of the people he still had like Minma, and what living within a village was like. She had been amazed by the prospect, never having seen or experienced something like a shinobi village. The far continent was all but untouched by mankind, making it nearly the ultimate haven for towering forests and large wildlife. It had made her family stronger, but also allowed the sparse humanity of it to divide them purely because of their own boredom. The blonde idly wondered the odds of two different sects of the Uchiha succumbing to the primal urge for power and blood. According to the journals of the Shodai and Nidaime Hokage, The brothers had different theories on the matter, the younger even going so far as to alienate the clan. Unable to let go of his untrust from the era before and the eventual death of his older brother. Hashirama, even to his dying breath, had believed that anyone, including his childhood friend, was capable of salvation. It was his beliefs Naruto had chosen to follow after stumbling upon the journals. However, he could understand Tobirama for his own way. It was why the young clan had always kept Tobirama's brutal truth and Hashirama's ideals closely together in his mind and heart, never truly favoring one for the other. But Katsumi's story, while cementing the fears of the younger brother, it also highlighted the elder's beliefs, the girl herself being that light that rose from the darkness. Pushing the thoughts from his mind, he pushed himself to a standing position, looking over to the still snoozing Uchiha. He grinned lightly at the peaceful look she wore, mouth agape without a care in the world as a small trail of drool escaped her lips. From everything the blonde had seen of the legendary Uchiha, Madara, Katsumi could pass for the man's daughter. The main difference being her hair being much tamer than Konoha's legendary trader. He also assumed the man was closer to his own height. There was not a chance in hell Shinobi no Shinigami was a damn midget. Absolutely none. Naruto felt his brows furrow for a moment. Why exactly was he questioning the height of a man long since dead and gone? Had that little midget bastard of a Yonde Mizukage really turned his view on short people to such a low? Why did it even matter? Shaking his head once more, the blonde summoned a clone, telling it to sit with the girl in case she awoke before he returned. The clone now sitting in place. The original made for the main building his clones had scoured during their preliminary investigation. The small army of solid copies had sealed anything not nailed down which seemed of use to him. But knowing the historically secretive nature of his mother's clan, Naruto had dedicated the rest of his stay to scouring the building himself for anything hidden. For example, from his mother's stories, there had been an armory within the main house building. It hadn't been found on the first look and his clones had been thorough. It just meant he had been right in assuming their nature and asking for the extra time. It would also provide him enough time to figure out exactly how he'd be explaining Katsumi to the Hokage and his sensei. Least of all to mention, he'd be able to learn more of the girl and her character. Kakashi smiled as he watched his 3 genin pick themselves up. It had been roughly a week since his co-captain of Team 7 had left on clan matters. But the team had not slouched an ounce in their training or taking of missions. And after almost a week of D-rank, all 3 students had been looking forward to this 1 versus 3 match. The silver-haired Jounin himself was beyond proud of the 3 young ones, not one of them relenting in the slightest as they sent him determined looks. Even through their bruised and battered visages, even after he had lessened how much he would usually hold back on them, they soldiered on. While they weren't anywhere near his league, anywhere near beating him, they hadn't held back a thing and followed his order to the letter. Even Sakura was coming at him with the intent to kill, even as he defended and parried their attacks, telling them their flaws and where to improve as they went. Katan, Gakyaku no Jutsu. His Uchiha student blew a ball of fire at him, as his crimson-haired student ran through 4 hand seals before clapping his hands together. Futon, Rapusho, he called before winds raced from around him and at the charging fireball of his teammate, greatly enhancing the Katan Jutsu's searing flames. Not bad, Kakashi smirked, as he landed on a single hand seal before releasing his own fireball, matching the combined attack in power. The smirk hidden by his mask, however, faded, as his female student came soaring through the dying attacks. Shinaro, she roared, before punching the ground a few feet from him, her chakra-enhanced strength forcing it to break apart and shatter all over. He answered before any of that happened, however, flipping over the girl before kicking her into some of the earth her attack had forced up. His mistake, however, was turning his back on his 2 male students, as said boys charged him, Sasuke wielding his ninjato and Minma brandishing his fuma. Kakashi was quick to throw several shuriken, before holding a familiar cross-hand seal, Ninpo, Shuriken Kagebunshin no Jutsu. He proclaimed before 3 became many. His students, however, didn't stop as Sasuke used his Sharingan to track and deflect them, Minma spinning his fuma in a way that blocked them easily. However, it did give the Jounin more than ample time to pull a scroll from his pouch. from which he unsealed his own ninjato, brandishing a kunai in the other. Sasuke was the first to reach him, and the first pushed back, the former Umbu caption showing just a fraction of his proficiency with a blade. Minma was a little harder to manage, having that unorthodox style of his elder brother, but still proved no real challenge. Both boys finding themselves with their backs slamming into trees. "Well, I think that's quite enough for one day. You three did very well," he said with a nice smile. "You move and act as a team with little to no trouble, and that is something to be very proud of as such a fresh team. But you three definitely still have a long way to go before you'll be able to fight a jounin together, let alone without each other." Minma rubbed the back of his head. "Did you have to kick us so damn hard?" he questioned before a kunai just missed his ear, embedding itself in the tree behind him. "Language," the jounin warned, even as his other students either stated or grunted their agreement. "For the rest of our training session, Minma, you will be working on your elemental manifestation. Sasuke, further your practice with Raihun, and Sakura, you will be continuing your work on the Rasengan." All three released their own grumbles at being ignored, but Kakashi, having been forced out of his lazy ways, would not be one to baby any of them. "Once I see some progress from you three, we'll be going to Hokage-sama to receive an assignment for tomorrow." He eye-smiled before sitting on the ground and pulling out his book of porn in one fluent motion. "And after training, we went to Gigi, and he assigned us our first B-rank mission to go assist Team 10 in Haru no Kuni. Though apparently someone else is being sent with us to ensure we're not in over our heads." Minma continued to explain as he and Sakura shared a booth at a kimchi barbecue with Tsunade and Shizen. "A B-rank mission only at the rank of Genin. That's nearly unheard of, Minma-chan," Shizen noted, a fair amount of worry showing in her voice. "We'll be able to handle it. No worries, Shizen-ne," Minma proclaimed as that foxy grin of his spread across his tanned face, Tsunade giving him a fond smile. "I can only assume that you're being sent with a powerful shinobi, but I want you to promise me you'll be safe, Minma-chan, and be sure to look out for Sakura-chan and Sasuke," Tsunade said, calmly sipping her sake as a fresh bottle was brought to the table for her. If there was one thing the Akimichi clan knew, it was how to hire an attentive staff in their establishments. "Minma-kun is right, sure show. Everything will work out," Sakura smiled, though she had to admit she was nervous for their coming mission. Not only would they be required to move fast, but with the B ranking, there was no denying there would be a shinobi battle waiting for them. Tsunade smiled before setting down her beverage, reaching behind her neck to undo the clasp of her necklace. Minma gave her a curious look as she stood from her seat, reaching over and replacing the jewelry around his neck. The kiss she planted on his forehead only seemed to make him blush in embarrassment, trying to hide his face from the pinkette next to him. "You made me a promise that you'd become Hokage someday, so consider that a gift of my faith and as a charm of good luck for you to always make it back okay, Minma-chan." Her smile was bittersweet as she imagined the last three people she had given that necklace. Her younger brother Nawaki, a lover she had truly believed in Kato Dan, and at the time, unknowingly her son Namikaze Minato. "It was my grandfather's and was given to me by him as a little girl before his final battle against Uchiha Madara." Minma was awed as he looked at the turquoise crystal. "This was the Shodame Hokage's?" Tsunade chuckled with a smile as she gave him a loving look. "That's right. You be sure to take good care of it, Gaki." Sakura smiled as she watched her teammate beam at his grandmother. He really did have the most infectious smile she'd ever laid witness to. "So, what exactly are you doing?" Katsumi asked, watching as the blonde seemed to just be holding a meditative pose. "Stretching out my senses. If I'm able to focus enough, I can sense even the chakra used to hold a seal together. I still haven't found the armory," he answered, his voice seeming distant thanks to his trance-like state. She hadn't ever really seen anything like this before. Sitting still wasn't the way of her clan, at least not her branch of it. From what the blonde had told her, the part of her family within Konoha's walls were much more sedate, their thirst for battle and power not near as tangible. She couldn't really even wrap her head around it, let alone what he had told her living in the same place most of your life was like. The longest she had stayed still in her 18 years of life was the 4 she had spent here, amongst the ruins of Yuzushiogakure. Her thoughts and musings were broken as she watched his eyes snap open, That wolf-like smirk of his coming to life. Found it. He immediately got up, walking from the main hall and into the village leader's office, where his ancestors had led the village to its former glory. Katsumi watched as he simply walked up to the left wall, a few feet from the opening to the room's grand balcony, which at one time must have overlooked the village. He crouched down, wiping a layer of thick dust from the floor, before grabbing a kunai and slicing open his hand. As the blood trickled onto the floor, she was finally able to see the ceiling array as it glowed brightly. In a moment it ceased, the black ink bleeding into a crimson red as the symbol of the clan was formed by his blood in the center. The wooden floor itself actually shifted before lifting up and sliding on its own to reveal a short staircase, torches already lighting the dark path. Do me a favor and stay here. I'm not sure why, but I know this isn't the main entrance, and with the level of blood seal that was, I've got a feeling only one of Uzumaki blood could even walk down this path. She nodded in understanding. She had not a clue to the slightest working of a seal, let alone what a seal master like those of the Uzumaki were able to do with them. Naruto ducked his head as he walked into the short passageway. There was this unnatural feeling building in his chest, like something was calling his very being to the end of this path. It was the oddest thing he had ever felt. He couldn't have put it into proper words at the time if his life depended on it. His eyes narrowed slightly as he came to a concrete wall, a seal encompassing almost every square inch of it. The most prevalent thing he could make out were the kanji emblazoned in each corner of the wall: heaven in the top left, dragon in the top right, Kirin in the bottom left, and earth in the bottom right. The dead center held the Uzumaki swirl once more, but with the kanji for maelstrom in even larger print than the others. I've never seen a seal anything like this, he whispered, reaching his hand out to brush over it. His eyes bolted open, however, when his fingers brushed over the kanji for maelstrom, and it was as if an immovable force kept his hand planted there, and after a moment it began to glow. Naruto reached up with his free hand to shield himself from the blinding light it shed. However, he suddenly felt the light fade as his feet began to feel damp and a familiar presence invaded his senses. Looking behind him, he found himself standing in front of Isabu, the turtle sharing his look of pure confusion. There is no reason for your confusion, son of Uzumaki Kushina. The voice, unfamiliar to him, was aged but held even more power than Hiruzen's aged voice. I wondered how long it would be before I was allowed to meet my daughter's child, but judging by your presence, I assume she has joined me in the place beyond life. His strong voice sounded weak at that revelation, and Naruto allowed his own sadness to radiate from him. Forgive me, child. I should have known better than to have brought it up. Take comfort that it's an inevitability for all that walk the world. The right to leave behind the pain of this world, the shackles that bind us here, and attain true freedom. Why, you're my grandfather? That is correct, young one. The matrix on which you placed your still bleeding hand is one I prepared long before the attack on our homeland. It will allow me to see who will lead our clan from the shadows and return us to the light, letting me impart the gifts and wisdom of the leaders before me. He smiled at the remaining look of flabbergasted on the boy's face. I see you have sealed within you one of the great bijou, formerly sealed within your aunt, my eldest daughter. The spectral blue form smiled genuinely as he gazed upon the equally confused chakra construct. It has been quite a long time since I have seen you, Michiothan. Not even I had fathomed a seal capable of this, Isabu admitted, only for the specter to chuckle cheekily as he ran his hand down the long beard he had. Seals gave the Uzumaki great abilities, but it is also what brought our untimely fate to us, the scales of balance truly at work. He nodded sagely with another cheeky chuckle. Young one, are you just going to question the possibility of what is clearly before you, or are you going to introduce yourself to your Jichan? Naruto shook his head, forcing the confusion from his face as he looked back to the violet eyes of the specter. My name is Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. It's nice to meet you. Forgive my confusion, he said with a bow. The Uzumaki clan head of time past once more unleashed a fit of those same chuckles. There is no need to apologize, Naruto-kun. There are even things that could still surprise me even after my long life ended many ages ago. I am the sixth head of the Uzumaki clan, Uzumaki Michio. Come, sit with me, we have much to discuss, and given the time, I expect you to tell me what you remember of my baby girl." He once more gave off that laugh, and Naruto smiled, doing as asked of him. Isabu only looked on and watched the two, specifically the sentient chakra impression of Michio. The Uzumaki truly did embody the will of the sage to an amazing extent, he thought. Only that man would have been capable of these types of feats. Katsumi sighed, leaning against the wall just a foot or so away from where the path had opened. It had been nearly an hour since the blonde had left her there. She had seen the bright light that had lit up the entire tunnel only 10 minutes after he had left, and while he may have asked her to stay put, she was getting worried. "I suppose there's no point in just standing here another minute waiting for him. Traps be damned," she huffed, activating her Mangekyo just as an extra precaution. It only took her a moment to get towards the end of the tunnel, and the first thing she saw was the blonde just standing there with his hand on the wall. Examining him, she noted it was like he was just frozen in time, unblinking and unresponsive. "Naruto." She snapped her fingers in front of his face 3 times, and no response. Just as her worry was beginning to grow, she heard the blonde gasp in a breath before starting to fall backwards. Her body moved before she could even process it, catching him and allowing gravity to work his head into her lap, her evolved Sharingan shining with worry. "Naruto, what happened?" "I am not entirely sure," he grunted, grabbing his head as if in pain. "I think I just met my mother's father, though, and he told me everything about the Uzumaki I couldn't learn from a scroll." His eyes were showing his confusion, even as he sat up. But when he did, they watched as the seal on the wall faded from existence before the stone wall began to sink. "Wow," Katsumi gawked, her eyes wide as the door opened up to reveal an armory with its own forge and venting system. "There's enough in here to arm the entirety of the old clan twice. There's even armor," Naruto muttered, allowing Katsumi to help him to his feet. "So, where should we start?" she asked, her eyes still showing her amazement. "I honestly have no clue," he chuckled tiredly. Sasuke gave a purely annoyed look to the team's backup for their mission to Haru, his elder brother, Uchiha Itachi. The elder Uchiha just looking back at him with a smirk as he and Kakashi talked, having boarded their transport to the snowy country just over a day ago. "So, why exactly are you looking at Itachi and I like that?" The young Uchiha didn't even look at his best friend and rival to respond, eyes firmly locked with his brother. "I don't like having to rely on him for anything." Minma looked between the brothers with confused violet eyes. "I mean, isn't it just like having Naruto and I here? They're the same rank and roughly have the same strength." Sasuke let out a sigh. "I suppose. It's just something different. I consider him my rival even ahead of you, dope." "You know I got the Rookie of the Year right. That name doesn't really work anymore," Minma responded, making the Uchiha scoff. "If I hadn't slept through the last year, you wouldn't have gotten that title, and we both know it," he said with that infuriating air of superiority surrounding him. "You want to bet on that, team? Sounds like you want your ass kicked, dope." "All right, you two. No fighting on the ship." Sakura rolled her eyes. The two were mature for their age, sure. But neither showed any of that maturity when their rivalry flared, not even a speck. It was beyond annoying for her to be the mature one of the team, constantly having to break the two up. Though, she did smile as Minma shot her an adorable pout, even if the Uchiha glared at her in annoyance. Shaking her head with a small smile, she returned to counting her weapons and tools. "All right, you three." The ever-calm voice of Itachi spoke, grabbing all of their attention. "The caption of the ship says we should be there within the next hour to two. Make sure you're ready for a sprint." "What's the situation we're walking into?" Minma asked, looking up to the Uchiha expectantly. "According to the missive from Asuma-senpai, his genin, Chuji and the princess have been captured. Our mission is to assault the castle with Team Asuma and dispatch the 3 A-ranked Yukinin and current ruler Kazuhana Dodo, the princess uncle." "Sounds like one messed up family," Minma noted, earning a snort from the elder Uchiha. "Just as flippant as your brother and Kakashi-senpai," Itachi said with a small smile before walking back to where Kakashi stood waiting. "Well, that's the last of it," Naruto sighed, zipping up a third duffel of scrolls holding weapons, jutsu scrolls, and anything else they'd found over the past several days of searching. What about the blade over here? Okami-kin, Katsumi called him, making him look up to the large carving of a Kirin with a ninjato held within its horns. Oh, I was saving this for last. It's actually hiding another weapon behind it as well. Michioji's chakra imprint told me about it, he answered, walking over and unsealing his mother's katana from his right wrist. Unlike the other times he summoned his blade, it was actually still sheathed as he walked up to the carving of a large dragon to the left of the Kirin. The Kirin symbolizes the Uzumaki clan's honor, while the dragon symbolizes our strength, he explained, slotting his blade in the outstretched claws of the dragon. The door clicked, and with a loud groan, began to pull itself apart, Katsumi looking at what was hidden with wide eyes. It was a naginata. The staff of the weapon was a pure turquoise color, the color of the original Uzumaki swirl. The blade was a shining, almost white, steel deeply contrasting with the gray fur that looked like that of a wolf's. "It's beautiful," Katsumi whispered in awe, Naruto nodding his head before grabbing it and removing it from the bindings holding it in place. "It's also very light," he noted, flipping and spinning the weapon as if he had always used one. For Katsumi, it was as if she was watching a kabuki show, the movements choreographed and fluently artful. However, it ended abruptly as the blonde willed the weapon into his sealing array before moving and grabbing his katana from the dragon. "I always found it odd that my Kachan only used one blade, when the style depicted in the scroll she left behind was a dual-wield style. Eventually, I just bought my own ninjato for the technique," he explained, now sealing away his katana before moving over to the ninjato, a perfect match in aesthetics. But it makes sense now that Michio-san would send his daughter away with the key to unlock the weapon of our first ancestor, passed from generation to generation. "Have you ever used a naginata before? You seemed rather trained with one," she questioned, watching as the ninjato itself was sealed into the sealing array on his left wrist and not the right. "Believe it or not, no, I haven't. Just something about holding it felt familiar. I'm assuming it has something to do with the shared memories passed on to me through that seal," he said with a shrug, still rather confused by the entire ordeal himself. "Regardless, I believe that essentially concludes anything I can gain from staying here." "And now you'll be taking me to Konoha with you?" she asked, her deep black eyes looking at him in question. "If you'd like to come, of course, but if not, you're free to do as you please until a time comes at which you'd threaten Konoha's well-being," he answered, Katsumi not missing the veiled thread in his words. If there was one thing she had learned about him in the short time she knew him, Uzumaki Namikaze's Naruto wasn't someone you'd want to be on the wrong side of. She knew he had held back drastically in their few spars, more than she had at the very least, and while she could match him to an extent then, having the blonde wolf after her would not be something she looked forward to. "I'll come along with you. I'd like to see what my family in Konoha is like particularly," she smiled at the idea, having not been around her own blood for as long as she had been on this island. "Well, that may be delayed. Hokage-sama will most likely want to keep you under surveillance for the first few days, giving him a chance to learn more about you," he explained, earning an understanding nod from the girl. "My word may carry enough weight to keep you out of some situations, but the old man is one who prefers to see it himself instead of trusting blindly." "He sounds like a good man and a strong leader," she smiled, making the blonde chuckle as they began walking from the estate. "You don't get the name of Shinobi no Kami by being a foolish man, even if he's a pain in the ass old monkey," he laughed, thinking of the glare the man would give him for that name-calling. A bestial growl escaped his lips, eyes of a usual jovial violet bleeding into a bloodthirsty crimson red, chakra of the same color spinning around him in a vortex. Those menacing eyes glared into the two Yuki Jounin, specifically directed at the large man who had just thrown Sakura and Ino to the side, limp and unconscious. Eminma. He heard the surprised gasp of his male teammate, felt the stares of bewilderment mixed with fear on his back. This chakra, while burning the muscles just below his skin, allowed him not only greater strength, but a sense on par with that which came naturally to his brother. He could taste the fear of his opponents and allies equally, but he didn't care. He couldn't care as he looked over to the two girls who had been caught off guard by this hulking brute. Another growl escaped his lips as he felt his nails extend into the claws, the whisker-like marks on his face deepen and darken, and his hair become even wilder and untamed. Team, get Ino and Sakura out of there. His voice wasn't the same, and the harshness of it struck a chord in the Uchiha's psyche. It was a fear he'd never once felt for his best friend, an envy of the power now rolling off his rival in droves. I'm going to kill these bastards before they even have the chance to move. Chapter 7. Shuiro no Kitsune. Fubuki down, the large Yukinin, Mizore, yelled, pushing his pink-haired teammate away from him. Not even a second later, his eyes widened as pain raced across his body, beginning in his chest where a fist had just dented his chakra armor. He collided another moment later against a tree, the vibration forcing snow from high above to cover him. Get the hell up. He looked blearily to the young boy they had severely underestimated, that unearthly chakra raging even more around him before the boy shot off again. I said, he growled, crushing an iron-like grip around his throat. Get the hell up, he roared, hefting Mizore with little effort and chucking him through one tree and into another. The Yukinin had never before in his life fought someone with the raw strength this boy was displaying, and as he heard another growl, his mind began to work. There wasn't much of a chance to get away from this, but there would be one way to stop him. There was only one form of technology they had at their disposal to counteract the boy, but it would cost Mizore greatly. Fubuki was the one in possession of it. She would have to be the one to use it. That meant he had to give her the opening. Casting the pink-haired woman a short glance, it seemed she had worked out just as much of it as he had, and with a nod he forced himself to his feet, even as his bones cried out in pain. You're not like the others, kid. You've got more power than any Jinnin I've ever heard of. Mizore spoke, wiping the blood from his mouth. Suddenly, his chakra armor seemed to glow in a blue light, steam pouring from the exhaust system of it. But you're not untouchable, the Yukinin bellowed, charging the boy with a fist cocked back. More steam shot from the gauntlet of his armor, propelling his fist forward at a greater speed than normal. But his eyes widened when the crimson-haired boy merely caught the punch, those crimson eyes glaring at him as he went for another punch. Again, the boy caught his hand before an entirely too cruel of a smirk came to the boy's face. The enraged boy tightened his grip, the metal immediately groaning as it bent and folded in on itself. Mizore himself yelled in pain, trying with no hope to get his hands away from the boy. His eyes widened when the boy suddenly let go, once more grabbing him by the throat. Time to make do on my promise. The bestial voice of his was eerily calm as within the palm of his other hand, blue chakra began spinning wildly before bleeding into red. Mizore closed his eyes, having seen in his peripheral vision that his backup was coming, but he knew it wouldn't reach him in time. Shuiro no Rasengan of Vermilion. The boy roared, slamming his hand into the already dented armor. The ball of tainted chakra ripped through the armor like a hot knife through butter, shooting pieces of shrapnel into the man's chest all around. There was no doubt in Minma's clouded mind, as he watched the man's body soar into the woods, that he had just taken a life. But he didn't let the adrenaline die. There was still one more he had to deal with. His crimson eyes widened, however, as when he spun pink hair came in his line of sight, too far into his guard. A grunt escaped his lips as the woman slammed a circular mechanical object into his gut, wires immediately jumping from the contraption and embedding themselves into him with needles. His pupils lost their vulpine nature, as they seemed to widen further as he felt all the chakra he had been exuding immediately torn from him. Minma, Sasuke yelled, watching the boy's body slump as he and Shikamaru stood in between the girls and the fighting. Before the young Uchiha could even move, the pink-haired enemy shouldered the Uzumaki air before taking to the treetops. Sasuke was already making to give chase before the woman jumped even higher and mechanical wings ripped from her armor, carrying her away faster and farther than he could reach. Damn it! The Uchiha punched a tree to his right, glaring at their fleeing enemy. What happened? Sakura grunted, pushing herself up before immediately cringing in pain. A second later, her hand glowed green as she ran it over her ribs, healing the screaming bones. I'll explain on the way. Heal Ino, we have to go after Minma. That woman took him, Sasuke growled, his Sharingan activated as he watched the woman's flight path even at such a great distance. Not a moment later, Sakura was already ignoring her pain, healing the blonde instead. Katsumi watched with intrigue as her guide turned his eyes to the north, those mismatched eyes seeming to be looking off distantly. She looked forward, trying not to fall behind the quick pace the blonde had set as she surveyed him. What is it? Her worry seemed to snap him out of it, his eyes now turning back to her. The blonde shook his head. Nothing I can be sure of. I just got a very bad feeling, however, he answered, nearly earning a groan from the woman as his pace increased. Do we really have to move at this pace the entire way there? She growled, obviously not used to the great distances the blonde could travel at his current pace. Well, I suppose we're close enough. He slowed his pace enough to fall behind her. He shocked her, however, when she felt him, still running, scoop her into his arms, that annoyingly handsome wolfish smirk coming to his face. Hold on tight. Don't want to lose you on one of our stops, he said cryptically, confusing her greatly. That was until he spoke his next words. Hiration, Jinsodakina Janpu. Flying Thunder God, fantastic jump. Katsumi felt her stomach lurch as suddenly they vanished before reappearing in another location. She nearly felt her breakfast escape her, as within the same second they vanished once more, until they had vanished a total of 7 times following the first 2. When they finally stopped, the blonde holding her fell to his knees, quickly letting her go. Oh shit. I'm going to be sick, he grunted, never before having used this theoretical technique of his to travel even greater distances. You? Katsumi questioned, having already lost her breakfast on maybe their 4th of 7 jumps. She was balefully glaring at him, a slightly green tint to her pale cheeks. He could have given her the slightest amount of warning before doing something like that. You could have at least told me what you were planning, maybe prepared me for it. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, the angry pout she gave him forcing a memory long forgotten to resurface. His eyes widened and his hands fell limply as the girl before him was replaced with a brunette Uchiha long since dead, who had given him the same look of frustration many times. G. Gomen, Hirohime, he stuttered, the girl looking at him questioningly. Are you okay? Okami-kun, you look like you've seen a ghost, she asked, making him chuckle at how dutifully she had nailed that one on the head. I'm sorry, for a moment you reminded me of my old teammate, right down to that exasperated expression. He laughed, a small sad smile coming to his face. Anyway, since the gate guard still seems to be trying to figure out how we got here, welcome to Kanehagakure no Sato. He smiled brightly this time, pointing out the shell-shocked guard and then gesturing to the village proper. Katsumi herself was amazed as she looked from the large buildings, smiling citizens, and shinobi, to the monument of the Hokage past and present. Naruto smiled, watching her awestruck visage, not quite used to the experience of someone seeing a shinobi village for the first time. It's beautiful, she smiled, her eyes looking over the market that seemed to open up further down the main road. Naruto allowed her to continue her examination as he walked over to the guard. Konoha Jounin, Uzumaki Namikaze. Naruto, reporting back from personal time. I have one with me wishing to meet with Hokage-sama. The guard nodded, writing Naruto's name down, and then looking to who he had appeared with. Does she have any identification present? Naruto shook his head. Consider it an S-rank secret for the moment. I'll be taking her straight to Hokage-sama. The guard nodded in acceptance, retaking his seat. Enjoy your day, Naruto-sama. The Chunin smiled, making the blonde nod with one of his own. Walking over to Katsumi, he nudged her slightly, earning her attention with ease. Come on, we need to get to the Hokage Tower and explain things. We'll have Umbu watchers until we do, he said, beginning to lead her through that market she had been eyeing. What is an Umbu? She asked, making him chuckle. I suppose there's going to be a lot about the shinobi system you'll have to learn, he said with a smile, the girl looking rather sheepishly back at him. Umbu are the Black Ops troops of Konoha, the top of the food chain, and take orders directly from the Hokage himself. The equal rank to them, without the Black Ops missions and more openly known and famed, would be a Jounin, followed by the Chunin, and lastly the Greenhorns, Jinnin. Are those the only ranks, aside from Kage? She questioned, making him shake his head. There's an honorary title known as Sannin within the Leaf, but only the original team to receive these titles have gotten them. Another is Sannin or Sage, which is something actually determined not by the village but by one's summoning contract. Katsumi nodded her understanding at that. Senin is something I've actually heard before, though I've never met someone who actually attained it, she said thoughtfully, stopping at a stall that was selling beautiful garments of many shades and styles. Well, technically, you have, he chuckled, making her laugh in response. I shouldn't be surprised, Okami-kun, she smiled, picking up a distinctly blue kimono battle dress, admiring it. Naruto, seeing the look in her eyes, only shook his head before gesturing for the stand owner to come over, the blonde simply paying for the clothing and surprising the female Uchiha with the gesture. You didn't have to do that, Naruto. I was just looking at what she had. Katsumi admonished him, only to receive a shrug. Though, Naruto had to admit it was sort of odd to hear her use his name for the first time since she had been introduced to Sake, the thought of that night alone making him force down a building tint to his cheeks. Consider it a welcoming gift. It's not like you don't need new clothing after being on Yuzushio for so long, he said with a smile, once again beginning to lead the way. Katsumi looked down to her clothing as they moved again, noticing the rough shape her violet battle kimono was in, before smiling at the bag now in her hand. Looking up to the blonde, her smile only seemed to widen as he seemed to navigate the streets without looking, his exotic eyes focused on the monument high above. Thank you, Okami-kun, she said in a quiet voice, blushing lightly. Don't mention it, Hirohime. Violet eyes opened blearily, Minma grunting as the ambient light assaulted his blurred vision. He groaned, immediately feeling the steel of cuffs cutting into his wrists and the draining of the device on his stomach. Looks like they caught some of your backup this time. Still going to tell me you've got a chance, Tubbs? The voice was feminine, sounding like it came from across the hall, and as he looked up he was greeted with the unimpressed look of one Kazahana Koiki, formerly Fujike's Yuki. Stop calling me that, you bimbo. That voice he recognized, especially coming from just to his left. Chuji, where are we? Jail ginger boy, probably headed towards a swift execution. Koyuki rolled her eyes, earning a growl from the crimson-haired boy. I believe I was talking to Chuji. I didn't say ungrateful princess turned 2-bit actress, did I, Chuji? Koyuki actually laughed at his response, shaking her head at the new boy. You've got spunk. I'll give you that, ginger boy. My name is Minma, and if you'd shut up I can work on some way to get us out of here, princess. He said the title with some venom in his tone, crimson flashing in his eyes before an electrical shock broke out across his body. Yeah, channeling chakra is a no-go with these things on us, Minma. Chuji sighed, Koyuki seemingly taking the crimson-haired boy's eyes in. She was namely surprised that he hadn't even yelled out from the shock, just grunted slightly. I could really use a bag of chips or 30 right about now. The Akimichi sighed, feeling utterly drained. Minma sighed, before taking a steadying breath, then lifted his feet up until he could reach the heel of his sandal with his bound hands. From the hidden compartment, he pulled a small flexible pick, Chuji looking at him surprised as ever. You're telling me you've actually trained to be captured? Minma gave him a curious look as he fiddled with the binds. You haven't. You understand this is a possible scenario for any shinobi, right? Well, I mean, yeah, but I didn't expect to be captured like this early on in my career. Jiraiya says to be prepared for the unexpected. It's usually what happens first, Minma chuckled, releasing a silent cheer as his binds unlocked. Now, to figure out how to get this damn thing off and get you down. So, what's that? The second C-ranked mission that's escalated to an A rank within a month. Hiruzen snorted, just involving your team maybe, but you'd be surprised how often an occurrence like this happens in our line of work, Naruto-kun. The aged Hokage sighed, exhaling a large cloud of smoke. Somehow I doubt I'd actually be any more surprised than you are, Ji-chan. The blonde chuckled, shaking his head with a sigh. So, you sent Itachi to back up my team? Correct. He's been needing a mission recently, and considering Kakashi is one of few of our shinobi to ever enter Haru no Kuni, he was an immediate choice, Hiruzen explained, quietly casting a look to the room's third occupant. Whom, may I ask, have you brought before me this time? Naruto gestured to the woman. This is Uchiha Katsumi. I found her stranded on Yuzushio shortly after my arrival, he answered, pulling a scroll from his Jounin vest. This will explain all the questions I'm sure you have as to why an Uchiha was on Yuzushio, the blonde said, gently tossing the man the scroll. Hiruzen caught it with ease, opening it simply enough and glancing over the report. So it would seem both fractions of the Uchiha clan have run into their own strife. I trust you won't mind explaining this to me in more depth in the future, Katsumi-san? Of course I wouldn't mind, Hokage-sama, the black-haired woman answered with a respectful bow of her head. Then, I'll call for Uchiha Mikoto, the head of your clan, and she and I will go through the process of instating you as a shinobi of the Uchiha clan in Kanehagakure no Sato. All I need from you is this form filled with your personal information, he said with that warm, grandfatherly smile of his, before glancing over to Naruto. I presume your next stop will be taking her to Tsunade for a routine physical? Sure thing. After that I'll be returning on my own to discuss a few things with you about that mission of mine. Hiruzen nodded in acceptance, knowing what the boy was referring to without much thought. Very well. Dismissed. It was lovely meeting you, Katsumi-san. Please, stop by tomorrow morning and we'll talk about your past before I introduce you to your clan. He smiled, placing his pipe back in the corner of his mouth as the girl bowed once more. With nothing more to say, the blonde lead her from the room, leaving the Hokage to shake his head at the door. I'll never understand that shitty brat's luck when it comes to finding beautiful women, he muttered, unknowingly causing each of his hidden umbu to sweat drop. Minma groaned as he picked himself up, the annoying laughter of the previously believed non-combatant, Dodo, ringing in his ears. It hadn't been long since he had broken from his chains, freed Chuji and Koyuki, and been rescued by Itachi and Sakura, the girl removing that chakra-draining device from him. But he silently realized, looking at the newly unveiled black chakra armor worn by Dodo, that his drained chakra had already found a new home. It annoyed him beyond measure, seeing a man with little to no shinobi training able to toss him around, without even having worked a day for that strength. His mind, of its own free will, phased through scenes of his brother working into exhaustion years ago, of himself and his teammates doing exactly the same. All it served to do was piss him off even more, that bestial growl once more escaping his throat. But his violet hues suddenly widened as he caught glimpse of his pink-haired teammate thrown his way. Without even a thought, he quickly jumped to her altitude before gracefully catching her in a bridal carry. Sakura smiled at him for the save, but they immediately understood their folly as their charge's yell echoed through the room, followed shortly by Dodo's dark chuckle. Oh no you don't, Minma growled, quickly pulling a kunai and tying wire to the end. With expertise only earned through hours and hours of monotonous training, did the crimson-haired Jinnin manage to not only throw the kunai to exactly the right place, but he was able to yank the wire attached to it in a way that changed its trajectory, forcing it to wrap around the center portion of the wings now coming from Dodo's armor. Got you, prick, he smirked, then lurched as he was pulled into the air like a feather. Minma, Sakura yelled, having not been able to grab a hold of the boy before he left her reach. I'll be fine, Sakura-chan. Go get everyone else, he called back, once more wrapping the wire around his hand to steady himself as Dodo only seemed to fly higher and higher. Damn impulsive idiot, Sakura raged, madder that he was once more taking something on alone than actually upset with him. She hadn't really understood the feelings Sasuke's description of how he soloed the Yukinin who had hurt her and Ino. But she could decipher the small amount of anger she felt that he had taken both shinobi on alone, demanding his best friend and probably the one person who worked best with him to stay out of it. When she finally got her hands on him, she would be sure to beat it into him, if she had to, that they were a team always no matter the circumstances. However, for now she was headed for where Sasuke, Ino, Shikamaru and Chuji were dealing with some of the foot soldiers. Before she could reach them, however, the pink-haired Yukinin, Fubuki, blocked her path with what seemed like a confident air around her. Nadar-kun should be dealing with those 3 jounin right about now. I'll take this time to work my way from the bottom up, she smirked, the expression widening when Sakura glared at her. This Nadar must be a bigger fool than you, thinking he can fight 3 of Konoha's strongest alone, she ground out, her jade-green eyes burning with womanly fury. Seeming as the only way for me to reach Minma-kun is through you. I'll only warn you once to not underestimate me, she added, taking the stance her master had been grinding into her skull. Fubuki laughed. Mizor was the weakest of us, and he beat you. I won't even break a sweat. Sakura shot back a smirk. Shinaro, she yelled before punching her bare fist directly into the floor, Fubuki actually surprised when the ground began to fall in on itself. The younger Pinkette was quick to take the small opening, jumping from falling debris to falling debris. Thanks to Tsunade, Naruto, Kakashi, and Minma working with her, she had acquired the greater speed required to close the distance, her long ponytail wiping behind her. I warned you, she roared, spinning herself around before delivering a kick that sent the woman spiraling into the floor below them. Just from Fubuki's pained look, Sakura could tell it wasn't a pleasant landing, but she only made it worse as a large boulder from her breaking the ground past her. Her hand quickly found the back of the large cement slab, using all of her strength to force it down, adding to gravity's effect with her chakra-enhanced push. Fubuki only had a moment to watch as the slab flew at her, only able to close her eyes and deny that she had been dispatched so quickly. Sakura pushed off of another smaller piece, pushing herself back to the throne room. Looking down, she felt her resolve weaken, staring only at what the boulder didn't hide, the spatter of blood. She didn't even feel the air behind her shift as her sensei landed, nor his hand grasping her shoulder. Sakura, are you okay? What happened to Minma and Koyuki-san? Sakura shook away the fog, looking up to the silver-haired Jounin momentarily confused. I'm fine. Dodo tried to escape with Koiki. Minma-kun was the only one able to get a hold of him and follow. The Jounin could sense her worry as he felt Itachi and Asuma land behind him. He'll be okay, Sakura, but we need to hurry up and find them. Asuma helped the others. The bearded Sarutobi nodded, disappearing in a body flicker. Itachi, Sakura, you're with me, he ordered, easily falling into his role as leader, being the shinobi to hold Jounin's status the longest of his peers. The Uchiha and pink-haired Genin quickly fell into step behind him, making their way out of the palace and into the snowy night. Good Kiba, now just do it 5 more times at that speed. Naruto smiled as he looked down to the feral-looking boy. It was the next day for him, and, after dropping Katsumi off at the Hokage's office, he was asked to join Team 8 for their daily training by Yuhi Kurenai. By technicality, it was what his current role applied to, though his main assignment was to Team 7 itself, which led to him now helping the young Inuzuka heir to hasten his clan's Getsuga, the blonde being familiar with it thanks to working with Hana. Naruto had already helped Aburame Shino, who he believed was quite possibly the most dangerous and furthest ahead for their age group, and Hyuga Hinata. The pale-eyed heiress was a different entity entirely for the blonde, however. While communicating, she was by far the shyest person he'd ever met. But her battling was a different story and part of the reason he was going now to work with her once more. She was fierce in a fight, proving that her father himself had trained her hard in the Hyuga clan's Jukin. But the blonde noticed several different steps compared to other Hyuga, even those of the main house. It was like the girl wasn't suited for the hardline style of Jukin taught by the clan, and out of the watchful eye of her father, found herself free to use more fluent steps. He already was well aware if Hayashi or their elders found out, it wouldn't be the worst thing for the girl, but they certainly wouldn't be pleased. In all honesty, Naruto could care less about their opinion, seriously believing that all of them using the same style for so long was just one of many of their clan's mistakes. True, Jukin was hands down one of the deadliest taijutsu styles within the leaf. But a user of such an unorthodox style as his father's, like himself or Minma, would easily outmaneuver the style. What is it, Naruto-sensei? Hinata asked him, pausing in her repetition of strikes on the training log before her. I noticed a few unique steps while we were sparring today, nothing I've seen any other Jukin user do. He only smiled as the girl seemed to immediately look at him with worry. I think it's a good thing, and if you ever need help with it, I'll be more than happy to help. Just no telling your two-san. The last bit was said with a wink, the girl now beaming at him in pure joy. Not many had praised her openly in the past. Thank you, Naruto-sensei. I'd greatly appreciate the help. She bowed deeply, Naruto only waving her off. No need for the bowing. I never really liked all that type of stuff much. I'm going to let Kurenai-senpai know that I'll make myself available in the future should I be needed. Just promise to keep at it. Don't give up and work harder than you have on anything else in your life." He smiled brightly, Hinata blushing slightly as she nodded her head to the older shinobi, quickly returning to her work. Not a moment later, Naruto was standing next to Kurenai, smiling as they looked over the three separately working genin. "You've got a good team here, Kurenai-senpai. I wonder if you'll be putting them forward for the Chunin exams." Kurenai smiled at the blonde. "I just may Naruto-kun. It would be a good experience for them, win or lose." It was the same type of approach her own sensei, Uzumaki Kushina, had taken when she had submitted her own genin team alongside Minato's years ago. Though looking back to that time, only Kakashi, Obito, and Guy had been ready for it then, but having faith in your team was paramount. Kurenai was certainly anything but lacking that said faith in her three genin. "If you'd be up for it, I'd like to talk to Kakenai about having our teams do a joint training." Kurenai nodded with a smile, happily agreeing to the proposition. "I'd also like to have you help two of our genin with Jinjutsu. I'm sure you know Kakashi, and I have nowhere near your talent for it." He laughed at that, Kurenai giggling at him, remembering when she had once tried to help him with the skill. Let's just say his Jinjutsu ability was severely lucky. Izumi and Shurshui had left him their eyes. "I'd be more than happy to help. I'm glad you're a sensei who can easily admit their own flaws and ask for help. Not many would." Kurenai complimented him, earning a sheepish look from the boy. "Maybe Hokage-sama should take a more serious look into giving you your own team." Naruto shook his head at that. "It was done this way for a reason. Just give it some time to play out," he said, earning a curious look from the Jinjutsu mistress. "I suppose you get your planning sense from your two-san, meaning I wouldn't get anywhere even if I asked," she laughed, turning those naturally crimson eyes back to her training genin, looking for any flaws. The blonde laughed with a sense of pride being compared to his father. It was far and in between when someone actually mentioned the man to him. Only those directly attached to him or his mother seemed to have the nerve. Not that it bothered him. Many just assumed it to be a touchy subject. "Well, I should probably get back to Katsumi-chan. I'll see you around, Kurenai-senpai." "Until then, Naruto-kun." She smiled, watching him disappear the same way Minato was once so well known for. The blonde reappeared in the same instance behind Katsumi, who was still in the Hokage's office, causing the girl to jump out of her skin in surprise. "Why must you do that, Okami-kun?" Naruto rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "Gomen, Hirohime. Pet names already, Naruto-kun. What would Mei-chan say?" Naruto blushed at the teasing tone of his sensei, the woman sporting a Cheshire grin as Katsumi looked at her curiously. "Who is Mei?" "Naruto's first future wife of several," the Hokage noted offhandedly, signing documents to instate the young Uchiha woman as a citizen and shinobi of Konohagakure. Future wife. Katsumi seemed downtrodden at the utterance, before the end of the old man's sentence hit her. "Wait, what do you mean, several?" Naruto-kun has been subjected to the archaic practice of the Clan Restoration Act, namely due to his possession of the Mokuton genome, however also because Uzumaki usually have offspring with high potential. Exhibit A. Mikoto smirked, gesturing to the blonde at the end of her explanation. "I'm sure he wouldn't mind having an Uchiha for his second wife, Katsumi-chan. I am the clan head. I can arrange that," she added with that Cheshire grin cringingly wide. Katsumi sputtered at the idea, her face the same color as Mikoto's youngest son's favorite food. "It's a tomato, FYI. She had literally just met the blonde and wasn't even technically part of their village yet. Though, she'd even call herself a fool not to see how appealing being with the blonde was to her, even if she had to share him. It would certainly need a fair amount of thought. "Mikoto-sensei, can we not tease Katsumi-chan, please? Or I can bring up what happened the last time we spoke with one another." The Cheshire grin faded quickly, the older woman now pouting deeply at the blonde. "You should consider yourself lucky. See if we drink ever again," she huffed, Hiruzen looking between the blonde and her with wide eyes, the rest of his body frozen. That well-hidden and closeted perversion of his threatening to break through as a small trail of blood leaked from his nose. His mind was reeling and taking it far beyond anything that actually had happened. There certainly wasn't any handcuffs or melted candle wax involved. What would Itachi say if he ever found out? No, the Hokage decided then and there. This would deserve a new ranking for level of secrecy, the first ever X-ranked secret to be taken to his grave. Unless, of course, he got drunk with Jiraiya and the younger super pervert was lacking in inspiration. No, surely Naruto and Mikoto would know it leaked from him. They would kill him, and then his student. Yes, this would have to go to the grave with him. That blonde prick was lucky to have such an amazing and understanding grandfatherly figure. Oi, monkey, did you finally stroke out or something? On second thought, he could kick the blonde's ass in a heartbeat. Jiraiya deserved the inspiration. Dodo smirked as he glared at the genin across from him. The three were now in a valley with three large mirror-like structures surrounding a small lake. You should just give up, boy. You're no match for my chakra armor. There's nothing you can do to stop me. Minma picked himself from the snow, his already crimson eyes glaring heatedly at the sneering man. I won't let some pompous ass, who hasn't worked, bled and sweat for his power, to ever beat me, you worthless bastard. He roared, crimson chakra once more finding itself bubbling around his skin. I'm going to show the princess just how weak you really are, and return her country right where it belongs. Do you hear me? Koyuki herself, sporting a swollen cheek and blackening eye, looked up shocked at the crimson-haired boy. She had just watched him get beaten, badly, but he wasn't giving up and she was quickly figuring that he never would. Minma, she whispered, watching as his form now exploded with the strange bubbling substance, a single tail forming at his back. Her eyes widened as he disappeared in a blur of speed, Dodo completely caught off guard by the fist that connected with his cheek. Unlike last time, Minma seemed much more in control, not just charging off for a second time to hit the man once more. Dodo grunted, picking himself up, wincing as he felt his cheek burn where the boy had punched him. The red-headed child was stronger and faster in whatever state he was using, and being hit by him seemed to have a lasting effect. This changes nothing, Gaki. I'll still kill you and your friends to take what is rightfully mine, the fortune of the Kazahana clan. Minma's aura seemed to darken, his eyes glowing darkly as they stared into the man's very soul. That's what you killed your brother for, orphaned his daughter for money, he roared, clenching his fists tightly. So, you're the type of scum my Nichan hates with every fiber of his being. Maybe this is how he felt when he killed the Yonde Mizukic. He paused, looking at his clawed hand before returning his glare to the man. Today, I'll further my Nichan's dream and take a worthless mongrel's life. His statement was punctuated by him once more disappearing in a burst of speed. This time when he reappeared, Dodo managed to attempt a swing. But the young boy caught his arm and swiftly broke it in a lightning-quick motion, bringing the appendage down over his shoulder. Dodo's anguished cry of pain was quickly silenced as the boy kicked him square in the chest, where the yin and yang symbol of his armor was. Minma didn't even pay the crack formed in the armor any mind as he wordlessly channeled chakra to his palm, once more summoning his vermilion Rasengan. It was at this moment Kakashi, Itachi, and Sakura arrived in the valley, the Pinkette having wide eyes as she looked at the state of Minma. Both she and her sensei were beginning to move towards him, for their own reasons, until Itachi grabbed their wrists, stopping them. No, he must learn to use this power. He's still in control at the moment, he said calmly, his Sharingan focused only on the boy who was like a second baby brother to him. If he was truly worried, neither of them would have beaten him down there. Kakashi seemed to agree with him, and accepted the Uchiha's reasoning with no fuss. Sakura, however, was a completely different story. She didn't even understand what power it was the crimson-haired boy was using. She just knew the feel of that chakra wasn't his, it didn't hold his warmth. If you truly want to know, and you really do care about him, Sakura-san, wait until he is ready to tell you of his burden. Itachi spoke, as if reading her mind. Before the Pinkette could say anything, however, a loud roar brought their focus back to Minma, all three of them watching as he plunged a different Rasengan, still vermilion in shade at its core, but wrapped by the same rainbow-like hues now for some reason reflecting from the large mirror-like structures. The effect of the Rasengan, while it still should have sent the man flying, seemed to have changed as this time it sent the man flying and spinning like a pinwheel. Before one of those large mirror-like structures stopped his ascent, his now lifeless body embedding itself in the reflective structure. The chakra immediately faded from the boy until he teetered on his feet from exhaustion, happily allowing himself to fall back into the awaiting snow. But he was still conscious as his head fell into not the crunchy snow, but soft green grass. Huh, so the fortune isn't even money. Stupid, greedy prick, he chuckled, allowing the sweet embrace of unconsciousness to grasp him. Koyuki and the three shinobi looked on, completely astounded by how quickly the land of snow had changed before their eyes. Is this what you meant, Tuchan? The princess whispered, tears openly streaming down her face as a memory long forgotten was now being played by the devices. A time much simpler, when her father was still alive, and the man had asked her what type of leader she would be surrounded by what she realized was her father's prototype. I'm sorry, Tuchan, she whispered, watching as the man now stepped into the shot and danced with her, even if you could only see from his thighs down. It was as if he'd known what was going to happen, and what he would need to remind her of to better their country, her country. She nearly jumped when a black cloth found its way in her line of sight. Looking up, she blushed slightly, finding Itachi holding it out to her. He didn't say anything, but she honestly kind of preferred the calm and gentle smile he gave her as he looked down towards the lake. She followed his look, smiling as she watched the pink-haired young girl fret over Minma's well-being. She could hear her berating him from here. But a smile came to her face. The hard-headed man she was sure he would grow into would need a strong woman like that standing shoulder to shoulder with him. Chapter 8. Calm before the exams. You're sure that none of the genin from a Wagakure will make it into the finals? Hiruzen rose a brow, earning a nod from the blonde sitting across from him. The two meeting in the young shinobi's office within his clan's estate this time, not even ANBU being able to listen in through his recently upgraded ceiling arrays. Naruto nodded. My contact within IWA has confirmed that only one team is being sent. They show very little promise, and being as you've asked me to oversee the second phase with Ankone, I can be sure they don't make it through, he said with a calm aura about him. Which in the end means they won't be getting caught up in the snake's plan. However, Kirigakure is a much different story. He tiredly sighed with a small smile making its way to his face. I suppose your betrothed had her own opinions on the matter and decided to send that team she's been bragging about so much in our recent meetings? Naruto chuckled at that. By now you know how Mei-chan operates. She feels that it's her duty after our help with their rebellion to return the favor any way she can. His smile grew, thinking of the woman he hadn't seen in nearly 2 months at this point. I suppose you're not complaining regardless, having well over a month with her. The Hokage chuckled, earning a shrug from the blonde. I think Aosan will be rather annoyed to be left in charge for so long, but I get the feeling he's easing into the duty more and more. Naruto smiled, thinking of the high-strung shinobi he'd often shared the battlefield with. That does leave us with one question, however. Will my wayward student go through with his plan having another Kage-level shinobi present? Orochimaru is an overconfident fool, but far from stupid. If my information is correct, the aces up his sleeves will make the playing field much more level than we'd like, Naruto said with a thoughtful gaze, Hiruzen giving him a suspicious glance in return. You know what he intends to do, don't you? All I know for sure is that he intends to separate you from any backup you could receive with a 4-point barrier. Of course, I have my own plans for that, he said with a smirk, Hiruzen looking at him with a raised brow as he lit his pipe. You're positive you can trust the ones feeding you this information to not be setting us up for failure? You should know me well enough to realize I trust no one entirely, Soji-chan, Naruto said with a smirk, earning a small sigh from the wizened old man. But one of them I trust above any others. Her hate for the Hibi team may even surpass that of Ankone's. The blonde allowed another smile to play at his lips at the thought of a certain vulgar redhead. He certainly does have a way of making women hate him entirely. Hiruzen shook his head. It wasn't actually just women. Most people didn't care for a person who looked at them only as insects for testing after all. My only worry is you being sure you'll be able to fight him at full strength without seeing the boy you practically raised. Hiruzen felt himself flinch against his will as the blonde handed him a chillingly calm look, all semblances of a smile gone from his scarred face. The Hokage couldn't help but to sigh as for a moment, he actually felt his true age settle onto his shoulder, the burdens he had carried for years ever apparent. I won't hesitate, and in case I know you won't have any such problems, Naruto-kun. Minma smiled as they walked through the gates of Konohagakure, his violet eyes trained on the fourth head of the monument, his father's stone visage. It was rather common that he did this, even when not coming back from a mission. The sight of his father's serenely calm look forever carved into the mountainside just seemed to calm him, knowing that in some way the legendary shinobi was always looking over him and the village he loved. The crimson-haired boy had known for a long time what his father had done to him, the burden he had left him with on the day of his birth. Some in his position may have screamed how it was unfair or cruel, and admittedly, when he found out he had done exactly that, he had no problem remembering how betrayed he'd felt when Naruto had told him the small hate for a man he always wanted to be meet and eventually aspire to be like. But it was him voicing those feelings and his brother explaining everything to him that had caused those feelings to ebb away slowly and allow a sense of understanding and acceptance to replace them. It was also when Naruto had promised for the first time to him that no matter what happened, he would always be there in their parents' stead, always defend him, and always share their paths. So caught up in those random deep thoughts, the crimson-haired Uzumaki was oblivious to the two sets of eyes focused on him, one set of jade green and another of pupilless blue. Sakura and Ino, respectively, were looking at the boy as any of the older males in their traveling party would say they often did. The pink-haired girl was thinking once more about that chakra she had felt him exuding during his fight with Dodo, that her getting hurt had been a trigger for. Just like back in Nami no Kuni when that bunting girl had sent her sailing and he stopped her from colliding with the bridge. She had felt herself heat at the protective aura he had in both instances, and it wasn't just pure rage after watching her be smacked away with no way of catching her. It was a protectiveness she both adored about him and wished was unnecessary, finding herself more often than not annoyed that she couldn't be more useful to him. But a part of her told her she just needed to push, train, and work harder, so she could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. Neither worried if the other would get hurt because they had each other's back. Ino, while the young blonde Yamanaka heiress was more suspicious of why her pink-haired best friend was staring at Minma, her eyes shifting between the two until they settled on Minma when she noticed a quick flash of blonde before the crimson-haired boy was on his back. The young kunoichi putting a hand to her mouth, preventing the giggle she felt coming at the sight of the scene now presented before her. Minma's violet orbs glared up exasperatedly at the blonde-haired shinobi sitting on his chest, while said blonde just looked around with a rather bored. "Oi, Kakabaka, where is Otudo?" he finally asked after settling on the lazy jounin, and Ino found herself hunched over in laughter, the other Jinnin in following her example in varied ways, some like Sasuke and Shikamaru not as blatant about it. Itachi smirked and shook his head at the blonde's antics, Kakashi rubbing the back of his head in a sheepish manner as he pointed to the ground below the blonde. Naruto merely raised a brow, continuing his act of obliviousness. "Use your words, Kakabaka, and answer my question." He narrowed his eyes in a clearly annoyed way. "Baka no Naruto and I," Minma finally growled, struggling to breathe under his brother's weight. Naruto looked down, feigning surprise for merely a moment. "Oh, Otudo, there you are. Why were you hiding from me?" If Ino and Sakura hadn't ruptured their spleens laughing at the elder brother teasing the younger, both were sure they had after that, no matter how relatively stupid the act was. At least, Sakura was until her sensei asked the dreaded question she hadn't even been expecting. "What are you laughing at, Pinky?" Ino physically fell on her bottom laughing, while Sakura glared at the blonde with a pure feminine rage lighting her jade orbs. "Who you callin' Pinky, Shinaro?" The blonde gave her the most serious, completely unamused look. "You," he said before she screamed, making to charge him before Kakashi deftly caught her by the ankle, stopping the scene from escalating any further. "Aren't you a little old to be picking on Genin, Naruto-kun?" Itachi smirked in a teasing way, making the blonde who still sat on top of his little brother glare at him as if he was stupid. "We can't all be sticks in the mud like you, Itachi. Lame-ass Uchiha." Sasuke seemed to be highly offended by the comment. but Itachi only chuckled at his best friend, far beyond used to such jabs. Anyway, you three need to report to Hokosama. I've got a D-rank mission for these Gakis. The blonde waved off his fellow Jounin in a bored manner, then smirked cruelly as his final words settled into the genin, and he received a collective groan of defeat. Shikamaru looked over to Ino. That trademarked indignant Nara look on his face. Are all blondes as troublesome as you two? Lazy-ass Nara. Naruto and Ino shot back at the same time, the older blonde sending the younger an appreciative glance as the other three Jounin left, intent on getting away from any madness that would ensue. All right, you six, let's get a move on. If you finish early, I might train you. Maybe. Naruto sighed as he stood off to the side at the meeting called by the Sandaime hours later, the D-rank mission of both teams clearing trees from his property and their subsequent short training session, or rather his evaluation of Team 10's current power, long since over. Currently, he was watching as Yumino Iruka spoke out against the nomination of this year's rookie teams for the Chunin exams, claiming how none of them were ready. It was at that moment he noticed the Hokage's eyes focused on him, and then realized that in fact most of the eyes in the room were focused on him. Well, Naruto-kun, what do you have to say about the Genin teams being ready or not? You've evaluated each of them, correct? The aged man asked with a small smile, full well knowing the answer. Hi, Hokage-sama. As you directed, I have overseen and evaluated each team within the past week. He nodded, standing up straight from his lean position against the wall so everyone's attention could easily find him. I can understand Chunin Yumino's concerns, but I consider them unfounded and the worries of an attached sensei. Hence why I believe he is one of the best to work at the academy. He makes lasting bonds with each of his students. Naruto praised the man's care, earning a small smile from him, even if the man knew there was a proverbial but coming. However, I found each team nominated by this congregation to be ready for the test to come. Some may still struggle, but I believe it will be a strong learning lesson for each of them and should be left to their current sensei's discretion, not that of their previous. Iruka seemed to deflate at that, releasing a sigh at the blonde's words, fully knowing that both he and the Hokage would have taken great care to ensure their point. Gomen, I just believed it was too early. I can't imagine any of them being ready for the pressures of the exam. Naruto nodded at the man in understanding. I have no trouble understanding that. It's not any easy test by most standards, but only within the test can we truly know who is and isn't ready, he explained, earning a nod of acceptance from the Chunin. Very well, the nominations of Teams 7, 8, and 10 stands. Are there any other who would like to place forth their genin? The Hokage asked, seeming to receive silence as his answer for a time until one of his more unique. If you would, teacher stood. I nominate Team 9, consisting of Rock Lee, Tenten, and Hyuga. Mado Guy spoke proudly, a man sporting a full green spandex bodysuit, orange leg warmers, and an unzipped Jounin vest. The eccentric man struck what was publicly coined amongst the village's populace as the Niska pose, a literal gleam sparkling of his rows of white teeth. Naruto's eye seemed to twitch at the man, most of the room's occupancy doing the same, while Kakashi and Hiruzen seemed to be the only two completely unperturbed by his eccentric acts. The Hokage nodded with a smile. Very well, and with that last nomination, we have all of the rookie teams from the past 2 years entered. Any other applications have been accepted and filed during previous meetings, he explained, pulling a total of 12 sheets from a stack on his desk. Hand these documents to your students, have them fill them out, and then sign them. This is their pass into the first phase of the exams in 1 week's time. Remember, you may have nominated them and believe they can pass without fail, but present it in a way that each will make the choice for themselves, he smiled, as each Jounin captain nodded, taking the papers from him. Now then, you're all dismissed. The vast majority of the group filed out following the final words of the meeting, until only Hiruzen and Naruto were left, the blonde now sitting on the edge of the Hokage's desk. The younger shinobi releasing a sigh as he lit the cigarette he had pulled from his flak jacket, the Hokage being much more used to seeing the boy do it, and not saying anything. How long until they begin arriving? Hiruzen chuckled at the question. With you being in charge of our network, you would know that far better than I would, Naruto-kun. But I assume within the next couple of days our guests will begin to arrive. Our enemies amongst them. Naruto sighed, exhaling a large plume of smoke from his nostrils. Indeed. Hiruzen nodded, pulling out his pipe and lighting the more pre-packed tobacco within it, taking his own calming drag of the fragrant tobacco. Which leads to one contingency we have not planned for just yet. Naruto seemed to sense his apprehension to bring up the subject judging from the way he glanced toward Hiruzen, but part of him knew the blonde understood what he was getting at. There's a very good likelihood I won't make it through the events to come, Naruto-kun, and I wanted in writing who I wish my second successor to be. Don't even ask, monkey. You know I won't take that hat. Naruto cut him off, the respectful tone he had used amongst his technical peers going forgotten. Hiruzen had always appreciated that Naruto left the formalities at the door when it was just the two of them, and only smiled around the mouthpiece of his pipe. It's not my dream, desire, or even wish to become Hokage. I've chosen my path to replace Danzo within the shadows for the betterment of the village where he failed and only amounted to abusing his power. Which, I understand and have given up my desire to see you succeed me. Hiruzen sighed, allowing the small smirk to fade. As much as he wanted to see his honorary grandson fulfill the dream he had left behind in his childhood, he wouldn't push it. But I would like to have your opinion on the matter, given the hidden role you play so closely to my own position. Who exactly were you thinking then? And don't say Erogigi. You know he'd refuse just as much if not more than I would. Naruto chuckled, feeling himself calm as the focus shifted before taking another drag from his cigarette. Honestly, part of me wanted to say Tsunade, but I don't wish to take from her role as the head of the medical branch of our shinobi, or her training of more desperately needed medic nin. Hiruzen sighed, now taking his own inhale of burning tobacco, which based on strength and experience, leaves me with one course of action, though I fear his readiness. You mean Kakashi and I, don't you? Naruto asked, mulling over the idea himself. He would have offered up the idea of Itachi, but he knew that avenue had even less likelihood of happening. I don't know how he'd take to that, given part of him still holding on to his past. Not nearly as much as he did before your and Minmakuin's impact upon his life, Hiruzen noted, earning a small nod of reluctant acceptance from the blonde. He's still certainly dealing with certain things, but I can rest assured knowing he will have your backing, alongside Tsunade and Jiraiya's support. That's one clan of 4 people backing him. What of the other 7 clans with actual numbers and their support? The only backing I truly need is that of the daimyo, and upon Danzo's last attempt to usurp my power, the man blatantly ignored the Hawk's recommendation of himself and asked of Kakashi's readiness to take the seat. I believe I would have his support and would know for sure before the final stage of the exams, he informed, exhaling a large cloud of tobacco from his mouth as he finished speaking. What of Kakashi's own feelings on the matter? One of you 4 will have to stand up and take the reins, and should Kakashi not accept, I know you'll proceed with the final order of your command given the Hokage is unable to lead for any reason. Assume leadership and protect the will of fire to the last breath. Naruto exhaled somberly, another plume of smoke following the words, feelings of worry at being stuck with the title in the not-so-distant future filling him. The next day found Naruto and Minma sitting in lotus positions, each reading over their own scroll with many others scattered around them. Tsunade was off to the side, once more drilling Sakura through their now shared taijutsu style, while simultaneously quizzing her developing medical knowledge. Naruto was sure it wouldn't be much longer until the blonde-haired Sannin decided to teach her newest apprentice a few of her own Doton ninjutsu, the 2 females sharing that aspect between them, or even the technique that Tsunade herself had perfected and mastered. But his main focus wasn't on them, but the futon ninjutsu scroll he had given Minma to study, the parchment from Yuzusho holding more knowledge on the subject matter than he himself did. Shinaro, his pink-haired student, shouted out, momentarily breaking his focus. The telltale sign that her fist was about to connect with something or someone with much more force than one would consider the girl capable of. His mismatched eyes once more panning over, he found himself to be right. The girl once more ruining his backyard by punching the ground, earning a small smirk from his bachan. Not bad, Sakura, but not enough, the older Kunoichi shouted, smashing her own fist into the ground beneath her. The resulting destruction was far faster and much more explosive than his students', the shattered earth of both attacks colliding between the two of them. His poor backyard in absolute shambles that he would most likely be left to fix. "They're pretty loud," Minma grunted, rubbing his head in frustration as he sat the scroll he had been reading down between them, amongst the many others. Naruto, of course, gave him a look of exasperation. "You're going to complain about someone else being loud, you?" Minma was quick to glare at his brother for the remark, but admittedly was unable to counter it in any way, shape, or form. However, he was still just about to attempt said rebuttal, at least that was until a new voice interrupted them. "Naruto, it's about time you let me take over his training, don't you think?" The blonde rose a sharp brow at his white-haired grandfather. "I figured you'd still be out doing your so-called research." Jiraiya seemed to pout at the boy's words, "and not for the reasons you'd think. It is research, and I would be if it hadn't been for your damnable sensei." The woman tried to straight up break my nose. "Well, were you spying on her?" "Well, I mean, but of course." "Then, you deserved it, and I'm more surprised she didn't actually break your nose than her attempting to." Naruto chuckled, earning a scoff from the man only an inch or so taller than himself. "As if she could break the nose of the world's greatest super pervert, Jiraiya-sama." Both of his grandsons deadpanned at him for that, but namely for referring to himself as a lord. "Anyway," Naruto drawled with an exaggerated eye roll, "I suppose it is about time you start teaching him about summoning, though I'm sure Shiro-sama would be ecstatic if I recruited him to the Okami tribe. I do remember promising Shimaba and you I wouldn't." He relented with a sigh. He honestly had no plans to share his contract with his brother. But he never was one to resist the chance to mess with the old pervert. The white-haired Sannin in question only glared at him, almost ready to open up a can of whoop-ass for the blatant attempts to annoy him. But he honestly didn't know if he could take on his eldest grandson. It had been that long since they'd sparred with one another. However, another interruption came for the Uzumaki clan before the question could find its answer. "Naruto." The blonde stiffened at the shout of his name, his mismatched eyes not taking long to narrow in the direction of his perverted grandfather. "Where are you, you little pervert?" "Tell me," Naruto began, his aura seeming to replicate that of the Shinigami itself as his glare began to darken, the Mangekyo beginning to manifest within his pupil. "You didn't do what I think you did." "What? You mean hinge into you while I'm doing my research?" Jiraiya chuckled nervously, backing away. "I would never." "How dare you peek on your sensei uninvited? I'll show you exactly what happens to perverted students like you." "Right, of course you wouldn't, Erojiji." Naruto relented all too sweetly as he sensed his irate sensei nearing him. Jiraiya, for some ungodly reason, seemed to calm at his grandson's highly unconvincing display. Tsunade, all the while watching with a smirk and shaking her head, her pervert never did seem to learn. The blonde Sannin, however, cringed, along with her student and Minma, as Naruto punched Jiraiya square in the jaw. The female Sannin immediately finding herself wishing she hadn't taught Naruto her technique, as suddenly a hole the shape of a certain pervert found itself in the wall of their home. "Minma, when Jiraiya gets up, tell him he is to teach you of the summoning technique. Should he not, I'll kill him personally," the blonde said quickly, limbering himself up. "If I don't make it back, good luck in the Chunin exams. Oh, and should she kill me, Bachan has my will." He managed to dodge just before his sensei appeared before them. Both brothers were stunned to see her in nothing more than a towel, blushes quickly searing across their entire bodies as trails of blood escaped their noses. Naruto was the first to recover, throwing his hands up in a facade of surrender. "Now, sensei, this is a huge misunderstanding. I was framed." "Run," Mikoto growled, Naruto nodding solemnly before shrugging and doing as she ordered of him. The irate woman nearly lost her anger at how quickly he seemingly vanished, before it returned with a newfound glory. "Get back here, you hentai." As the crimson-haired boy watched her leave, he became rather thoughtful. Maybe Nai-chan is right. Women really never do mean what they say. Or did he say they were confusing as hell? "He said we're confusing as hell," Tsunade chuckled, knowing the exact phrase her youngest was speaking of. Naruto had practically sworn they'd one day be his dying words. Most likely Izme tried to kill him over something small and blown out of proportion. His words, not hers, but they sure did make her laugh. Knowing Jiraiya and Minato could have been quoted saying the exact same when they thought their significant other couldn't hear them. Though, she suddenly noticed her grandson most likely hadn't heard her answer. The boy now crumpled just below the hole his grandfather had flown through. Looking down, she saw her apprentice exuding an aura of pure womanly fury. Apparently, the pinkette hadn't taken his musings well. She just chuckled and shook her head, being far from innocent about beating her own dumb male. We need to work on your timing of the chakra release. Then you might be able to put him through a wall at this distance, she laughed, patting the girl on her head. Damn it, sensei. You can't use my own damn kunai against me. Naruto cried out, ducking under the kunai chucked at his head, his own blade. He didn't even do anything. Then stop running, you little perv. No, not falling for that one twice. He had made his mistake, one honestly so far beneath him he never imagined it to be possible, but he most certainly did just smack his forehead on a branch. The strong would released a groan at the impact, but sent him falling to his demise. No, the fall wouldn't kill him, not even hurt him. But it would give that infernal sensei of his the time needed to trap him. Mikoto managed to do just that, jumping on top of the blonde and pinning his hands above his head with ease that surprised him more than the branch connecting with his forehead. Her other hand was holding another of his kunai to his neck as she sat on his lap, completely uncaring of their compromising position. Now, Naruto-kun, why don't you explain to Sensei why you were spying on her? Naruto went to explain what had actually happened, but hissed as he felt the blade cut lightly into his neck. Actually, don't say anything. I think I know exactly why you did it. Naruto gasped as she punctuated her sentence by grinding herself into him, releasing a moan as she felt her bare skin rub him. You just didn't get enough from that kiss Sensei gave you. Did you, my cute little Jinnin? Naruto, for the first time in his life, found himself without comment, no smart remark, no nothing. His mismatched eyes only widened as she continued to grind her bare womanhood against him. Mikoto's sensei, he managed, but unintentionally jerked upward as she moved the blade from his neck and stabbed it into the ground just by his head. Her hand quickly found his cheek, caressing it as she moaned at her own ministrations mixed with his unintentional movement. It's okay, Naruto-kun, Sensei will show you, she purred, surprising him as her lips crashed into his once again. This time, however, Naruto couldn't really find it in himself to fight her as she forced her tongue into his mouth. They both moaned at the sensation, Mikoto never once ceasing her grinding. But you have to show Sensei yours too, Naruto-kun, she said, breaking the kiss, then bit his lip. It can be our little secret, any? It was that moment, as Mikoto's free hand traveled south, that Naruto realized just how turned on he was, as did his sensei. Kami, Naruto-kun, is all of that because of your sensei? The damnable woman purred. Fuck it, Naruto growled, Mikoto's eyes widening as he turned the tables on her in the blink of an eye, something she knew he was capable of from the beginning. My, Naruto can be careful, Mikoto admonished, leering into his eyes with unadulterated desire. Sensei loves it rough, she might fall in love. Naruto released that wolfish smirk of his, quickly moving down to capture the matriarch's lips, eliciting a moan to escape her as their pelvises grinded together. They only broke the lustful kiss for a moment as the teacher, quite literally, ripped the black shirt from his chest, the kiss reigniting as she began to fumble with his pants. Mikoto, however, was caught off guard when, without even breaking the kiss for a second time, her student ripped the towel from her form, his hand quickly finding its prize as it groped one of her generously sized breasts, his other hand caressing her thigh as they continued to grind against each other. Not wanting to be outdone, Mikoto finally managed her way into his pants, grasping the thick, long, hot member eagerly awaiting her touch. Mikoto smiled triumphantly as he broke the kiss to release a very pleased groan. Do you like the way my hand feels against it, Naruto-kun? Why, yeah. She giggled when he moaned once more as she continued to pump it. Her husband hadn't been anywhere near the size of the blonde, and purely driven by her lust, she had never been more thankful for the man's betrayal. I wonder how much you would like to have this monster of yours in my mouth, she purred into his ear, continuing to jerk his member. She moaned at just the thought of it. I'm getting wet just thinking about it, Naruto-kun. Naruto grunted. He was painfully aware of her arousal. He could smell her sweet scent thanks to the enhanced sense of smell his summoning contract granted him. Not to mention, every time she pumped his member, she rubbed it against her lower lips, as if to drive him to insanity. Will you taste your sensei? Can you do that for me, Naruto-kun? His inhibitions long since forgotten, the blonde didn't even answer as he pulled himself back and found his way between her legs, his mouth eagerly attacking her wet pussy. His nose filled with her wonderful scent as it was buried into her neatly trimmed bush. Oh, Cammy, Mikoto grunted, both of her hands working through his blonde hair as she lifted her legs up, giving him complete access to her body. Fugaku had never done this for her, had never made her cry to a deity or scream his name in pure pleasure as he worked her over. A few moments of pure bliss passed by in an instant, before she tore his face from her womanhood, her body raking with a climax as she released her juices all over his chiseled, young chest. No more. I need you inside me right now. The forest was filled with cries of pure pleasure for a good portion of the afternoon, student and teacher indulging in one another. Both had every intention of keeping this between them, but neither could care less at the moment even if her son found them. It was for this reason that neither clan head noticed the perverted eyes watching from a safe distance. Perverse giggles escaping the clone of a certain white-haired man as it scribbled over its notebook. This is pure gold. That kid's a damned legend, he giggled, quickly looking up with proud eyes before returning to his scribbles. Mikoto sighed as she rested her back against the door to her home, having just walked in, what she and her student had just done for more than a few hours fresh in her mind. She probably could have allowed him to do anything he wanted to her for much longer than that. There wasn't a single doubt about that in her mind. Sure, the stray thought of her long-since past best friend feeling betrayed because of her lust for the woman's eldest son crossed her mind. But part of her felt as if the woman, while initially pissed, would have eventually turned a blind eye to the situation for the sake of her happiness. The Uchiha matriarch scoffed at that, another part of her still unbelieving at what she and her student had done and how much she just loved it. Cammy, he was perfect, and if she was completely honest with herself, she would have done it even if Fugaku hadn't defected from their clan and the village. She could even remember stray memories of thinking of the blonde during her baths. It was just something about him. He drove her normally controlled mind and emotions into pure lust, and the worst part was she couldn't even fathom why. Mikoto-sama, are you okay? The older woman jumped, coming back to reality to find her newest clanswoman looking at her with worry. Cogs began to twist and turn in the woman's plotting mind, a small smirk coming to her face as a thought hit her. Maybe she couldn't openly date the much younger man, but she could always revisit the idea of fixing him up with a proper Uchiha woman. It would also give the blonde an excuse for late-night visits to the Uchiha compound, to visit her and continue their erotic adventure. Oh, she could most certainly work with this. She could already taste his member filling her mouth with its girth again. I'm fine, Katsumi-chan, she smiled, hooking her arm with the younger woman's after reaching her in less than a second. I just had a lovely lunch date with my old student, Naruto. Her smile widened unnoticeably as she witnessed a small blush spread across the young, lithe woman's face. I wish you would have invited me, Mikoto-sama. I would have loved to see Okami-kun again, Katsumi exclaimed, allowing the older woman to pull her into the sitting room. I'm terribly sorry, Katsumi-chan. It was more a private matter between he and I. Just to catch up, you understand. Mikoto gave off that natural motherly smile of hers and the girl accepted it without question. You aren't rethinking my offer to set you two up to be married, are you, Katsumi-chan? Katsumi's face once more became as red as a tomato, the Uchiha matriarch's Cheshire grin once more displaying itself. Well, I don't know about marriage just yet, she nervously spoke, Mikoto finding it rather adorable. It was very contradictory to the way the woman usually acted. But I don't believe I would be opposed to dating him, even if he's supposed to have multiple wives. Mikoto noted that seemed to be a reoccurring topic, and rightfully so, Being married to a man with other wives was essentially like being married to him and those other women. Anyone would be apprehensive about putting themselves in such a situation, let alone missing the opportunity to have the man they loved completely to themselves. I believe Mei-chan and you would get along quite well. I'm sure you'd at least be able to work him over well in the bedroom. Mikoto-sama. The Uchiha matriarch giggled at the cry of embarrassment, enjoying this far more than she let on. Or maybe it was the idea of Naruto working over her and several other women like the little sex god he was. Please, Katsumi-chan, I was just teasing you, she giggled, quickly brushing aside those thoughts for a more private location. But, as I was saying, if you would like my advice or help with Naruto, all you must do is ask. She once more gave the girl her motherly smile, earning an appreciative one in return. Thank you, Mikoto-sama. The young girl beamed, brushing one of her curly black locks behind her ear. Oh, the pleasure is all mine. Katsumi-chan, I've always wanted to fix my student up with a proper Uchiha woman, she said aloud. Or rather a couple, meaning me. She kept the thought to herself, allowing herself to reminisce about her afternoon as she and the girl moved towards the kitchen, intent on starting dinner. Naruto rolled his shoulders as he felt the expensive sake burn his throat, looking around the bar he currently found himself in. It wasn't the busiest he'd seen the place. Being a shinobi-only bar, it was usually packed to the brim. But today it was much more subdued than usual, not a single fight having broken out in the hour he'd sat there drinking to celebrate what he called a win. Sure, Itachi would probably kill him if he ever found out, but at least he'd die with a smile on his face. Even if both he and his sensei had no intention of going beyond the complex, yet simple arrangement they now found themselves in, it didn't mean they couldn't enjoy it. He was, however, broken from his musings as he felt a hand clasp his shoulder, looking over to find the one and only Mitarashi Anko smiling boisterously at him. Where you been at, kid? It's been a while since I've seen you in my lovely establishment, she beamed, forever proud that she was in fact the owner of the most popular shinobi bar within the village. I had a mission, and being a teacher for Genin apparently means I can't drink all hours of the night, supposedly, he said, rather annoyed by the so-called fact that cut into his personal time. Yeah, I heard from Kurei-chan you've been working with all the new teams lately, she smirked, until she noticed the blonde seemed to be struggling with something. Ah, so you're not here just to visit your honorary Ankone-sama, she stated, nudging his shoulder. Spit it out, Blondie. You're one of very few people who can ask me anything. The mark Hebe team gave you. He paused, examining her reaction and finding her slightly shell-shocked. I need to examine it. I may have found a way to either break it or rewrite it and free you from his possible control. Her eyes, saddened by his beginning, seemed to shone with a small glint of hope as he finished. You can remove it? No, I don't think I can remove it, but I know for a fact I should be able to rewrite it and remove some of the damage the bastard left you up there, he said, tapping her forehead, eliciting a small chuckle from her. You better not be getting my hopes up, Gaki. You know this is a sensitive topic for me, she said somberly, allowing what she could remember to surf her mind in short, brisk flashes. It was like some sort of nightmare she could never find the answer to. Not even the Yamanaka had any luck. I know. Just come by the house before the exams, and I'll give it a look, Ankone, he smiled, placing money on the counter as he stood and walked out. The torture specialist sighed, closing her eyes to steady herself as she breathed deeply. You really never do break those promises, Gaki, she smiled, picking up his money before stuffing it into her fishnet shirt. I wonder what Kakashi-kun is doing. I could use some stress relief right about now. She smiled ferociously, that dominate personality of hers never down for long. The next day once more found Naruto sitting by the main gate of the village, waiting patiently for a certain Mizukage and her entourage. However, he had also received word that the teams from their longtime ally Sunagakure would be showing up around the same time, if not before his future wife. Fully knowing what was to come, Naruto found himself with mixed feelings on the matter of their desert-dwelling counterpart. Naruto hadn't really minded the crass man known as the Yondaime Kazekage, Sabaka no Raza, the few times he'd met him. He had actually found himself rather impressed by the man's illustrious battle prowess, his control with gold dust, sand, only being dwarfed by the Sandame Kazakage's control over the iron sand technique. But he was rather disappointed by the man to learn from Taiyuya that he had been so successfully played and outsmarted by Orochimaru, no less killed by the detestable snake. He found himself surprised by his thought's relevance as the convoy from Sunagakure appeared from a burst of speed just before the gates. It was just the two Jounin and their three-man squads, as reported to him and the Hokage from separate sources. But he found himself evaluating the team behind the Jounin unmistakably known as Baki, the man a legend in his own right. The first he noticed was easily the tallest of the three, donning a black bodysuit that appeared rather cat-like, or paint, in a purple shade on his face and what he could only assume to be a puppet on his back. The boy looked admittedly unbothered under his scrutiny, the team seeming to have noticed him quickly. But, at the end of the day, the boy was barely a blip on the blonde's radar. The second, however, was a girl with sandy blonde hair pulled into four spiky pigtails at the back of her head, a pair of teal eyes seemingly giving him more than a simple once-over. Her outfit was simple, consisting of an purple off-the-shoulder battle dress, revealing fishnet garments covering her shoulders, the outfit being finished by a long red sash tied around her waist and more fishnet on her left thigh and right calf. On her back was what he easily noted to be a battle fan. She may be the most challenged amongst the three. Wind users from Suna were notoriously strong from a young age. However, his thoughts of her being the strongest was completely dashed as his eyes met purely emotionless green eyes. No, he knew the emotion radiating from those eyes directed at him. It was simply bloodlust at its purest form. The boy, however, did nothing to unnerve the blonde, the older shinobi only smirking as he eyed the red-headed child. His eyes ignored all the defining features of his black clothing, choosing to focus on the rather large gourd on his back. So, this was Raza's son, and the Jinchuriki of the Ichibi, Shikaku. The sand spirit was easily the worst beast to be sealed with, especially improperly from what Naruto could make out from the seal on the boy's forehead, and was the only Bijou who had screamed his name for the world to hear. The blonde, however, was already forming a plan to take care of that in the near future before the clearly unstable boy killed any more than he had. "Ohio, Suna Shinobi. Welcome to Konohagakure." Naruto smiled, unfazed by the blatant killing intent being directed his way. "My name is Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto, and I am here to ask that each of you remember our non-aggression pact during your time within the village, outside of the exams, of course," he said, once more pointedly looking over the Genin. Without making a hand seal, his audience seemingly amazed minus the red-haired boy, as a branch grew from his shoulder forming into a perfect clone of himself. "My Mokubunshin will be showing you to the hotel in which you will be housed for your stay here. Please do stay out of trouble. It won't be often when there aren't eyes on you." He smiled, ignoring the gobsmacked look remaining from the display of his Kekkei Genkai. "Why, you're the Senso no Okami," the blonde-haired girl noted, causing an honest smile to spread across his cheeks. "Please, just Naruto is fine. I don't care much for the monikers, no matter how well they describe my past," he said, wondering why the girl seemed to be starstruck, with a hint of fear in her eyes. "How about you three tell me your names, since even my Genin could recognize your sensei." Baki seemed pleased by the small amount of praise, but was hiding his apprehensiveness of being in front of one of Konoha's strongest very well. This is one man their Kazakage had told them to avoid if able, and had some of the largest bounties on his head, wanted alive within a void on sight order no less. Sabaku no Gara, the shortest of the three, was the first to say, his eyes still clearly transfixed upon the blonde. "Sabaku no Kankuro," the puppet user said, not hiding his apprehension as well as their sensei. "Sabaku no Tamari." The girl smiled, the only one to do so. Wait, why was she looking at him like he looked at a bowl of ramen after 3 weeks of not having any? It was rather unsettling to have someone look at him like a big hunk of succulent meat, but if he was being honest with himself, he didn't much mind. She was a rather attractive girl, to be a potential enemy, and most likely a couple years his junior. He could at least tell she was older than her brothers, judging by the way she carried herself. The children of the Yondaime Kazakage, all on the same team no less. He nodded his head before gesturing to his clone and the other team waiting on them. I'm sure I'll run into you all again sometime. You should get a move on. He gave them a friendly smile, still feeling Gaara's eyes locked onto him even as they walked away. He was more than sure his clone would be getting quite the similar treatment from the boy. His senses jumped for a moment and sighed before making yet another wood-based clone. However, a smile graced his lips as his eyes found what his senses had alerted him to, a very familiar mane of auburn hair. It would seem May had noticed him as well, as the Mizukage ran unashamedly ahead of the single team walking behind her, none of them minding in the least. It had been a long trip of the woman voicing her concern for her betrothed and wondering if he had missed her or what he had been doing. But all of it seemed to culminate as arguably one of the strongest kunoichi alive jumped into the outstretched arms of the man she loved. The blonde effortlessly spun her around as he hugged her, her long blue battle dress flowing with the movement just as her hair did. "I've missed you, Mizuhime," he whispered into her hair, unable to see the bright smile that spread across her face. "I've missed you, Narukuen," she replied, nuzzling her head into his shoulder as she always loved to. However, Naruto was caught by surprise when she quickly picked her head up and slammed her lips to his, the blonde easily melding into the passionate gesture. "I think I've missed that the most," he said with a goofy smirk as they broke for air, the Mizukage giving him a cocky grin as he rested his forehead against her own. "I bet I can think of something you've missed a little bit more than that." The way she said that immediately brought a look of excitement to the blonde's face. "Go ahead," she smirked, before the young couple disappeared in an instant. "Ah, young love, passionate, youthful and full of awesome rough sex, right Gaki?" Zabuza smirked, throwing his arm over the clone's shoulder, who only shook his head at the man. "What would you know about that, Zabuza-sensei?" Zabuza deflated, even hearing his own Jinnin giggle at his expense. Well, aside from Chojuro, he scared the boy too much for him to do that. "Why do I even like you again? Because I keep things interesting?" "Oh yeah," Zabuza said, laughing